Chair, council members, and participants, we are now live.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. This is a public hearing of the Committee on Public Safety regarding resolution number 200487. And before we begin, I'd like to recognize Ms. Samantha Williams, Esquire, to read a required statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current health crisis, city council committees are meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make this remote hearing possible. Instructions for how the public can view and offer testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearing, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. Everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. And because this hearing is being recorded, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to Councilman Jones recognizing members for questions or comments they may have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And will you please call the roll? And will those members in attendance please say a few words and say present so that your image may appear on the screen.
Councilmember Thomas.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm present.
Councilmember Green.
I am present. Looking forward for today's conversation.
Councilmember Gautier.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Samantha. Good morning, colleagues. Present.
Councilmember Gim.
Good morning, Council Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Looking forward to this important conversation.
Councilmember Brooks.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. I'm present.
Vice Chairman Johnson. And Chairman Jones.
I am present, and thank you, and good morning to all members and the viewing audience. I want to thank you for being on the committee. A quorum is present, and we will begin the hearing. Ms. Williams, will you please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 200487, a resolution authorizing the Committee on Public Safety to hold hearings on the scourge of vehicular hit-and-run incidents in Philadelphia, to give voice to victims and their families, and seek solutions to reduce and then eliminate this problem from our city.
Thank you. Before we begin testimony, I'd like to recognize the author of this resolution, Member Thomas, to kick us off and talk about the purpose of this very important resolution.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everybody that's part of this conversation today. I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you to Councilmember Jones, as well as the other members of council, including my staff, as well as his staff, for putting together this hearing today to have what we feel like is an important conversation about an issue that's not getting enough attention. Currently, right now in the city of Philadelphia, and unfortunately, we have a number of different issues that we face on a consistent basis, which is led by this pandemic, this unfortunate coronavirus crisis. But, you know, as a council body, we talk all the time about the different concerns that we have across our city. And one of the issues that is just not getting the attention that we know it deserves is this issue of hit and runs, specifically hit and runs that lead to a fatality. So today, we're hoping to have a robust conversation. I'm glad that I have so many of my colleagues, specifically district council members, on the call, because we know that this conversation is going to have something to do with infrastructure and addressing infrastructure needs in our city. Right now in the city of Philadelphia, 50% of the people in our city essentially commute every single day. Compared to other large cities, that number is extremely high. And we're talking about people who commute by themselves. And that's a stat that essentially impacts traffic. We see 80% of our car accidents here in the city of Philadelphia happen only on 12% of our actual roads. So while we recognize it's a citywide problem, we also understand that it's not a problem that exists on every road and on every street here in the city of Philadelphia. We recognize that some places have a higher likelihood of there being some level of incident as it relates to a car accident. And again, that's the point of having today's conversation. 2020, though, was specifically a disturbing year. And if you think about, again, the fact that the year was highlighted by the unfortunate coronavirus crisis, and the fact that we had to spend a lot of time home, is actually extremely alarming to know that we had a 70% increase, 78% increase as it relates to hit and runs that lead to a fatality. We know that 1 in 4 car crashes in the city of Philadelphia ended in hit and run, and we've seen over a 200% increase in accidents in certain sections, in certain districts here in the city of Philadelphia. And so when we know that we see more deaths in 2020 than what we've seen in over a decade because of car accidents, we know that there have been a number of reports and concerns from constituents across the city as it relates to this issue. I want to say thank you to everybody for participating in today's robust conversation. And I look forward to not just listening to the concerns, but also discussing possible solutions that we can implement to begin to address this issue. So what started as a streets and services issue quickly turned into a public safety issue, and that's what brought us here today. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everybody for participating in today's conversation.
Member Thomas, thank you for your insight, foresight to bring this to council's attention, and more importantly, come up with solutions to address this problem. With that, Samantha Williams, will you please read the names of the first panel to testify on resolution number 200487?
The first panel to testify is Captain Mark Overwise, Christopher Pahalski, and Lily Reynolds.
Thank you very much.
Chairman Jones, I believe that Councilmember Gim is requesting to make brief remarks.
Member Gim. Good morning, everybody. It doesn't look like my video is working, so I apologize for that. But I wanted just to thank the sponsor of the resolution for this important conversation. And in particular, just wanted to note the importance of this work. And, you know, we will be hearing from a number of city agencies and others who will be talking about this. But really just appreciate Councilmember Thomas for focusing in on this issue. When we first came in 2016, 2017, we had long talked about the importance of focusing in on hit and runs, particularly in the immediate area within a quarter mile of a school. We've been working on problematic issues such as massive numbers of vacancies in school crossing guards and seeing accidents happen during school hours at intersections where you can see in some places 5 different roads converging together in a high-speed area, and watching as middle schoolers bring their kindergartner or primary grade siblings along with them to navigate those streets. There's no question that the city needs to invest both its thinking and its capital into real investments that address this issue. We have already done a tremendous amount of work through knowing what can be possible through Vision Zero, partnerships with some of the organizations that are going to be speaking today, and most of all by, I think, uplifting the voices of individuals and families who themselves have been huge advocates on taking some serious solutions to this. So I just want to thank the council sponsor. I want to thank this committee for really taking this issue so seriously.
Thank you, Member Gim. Okay. Will the first individuals to testify state your name for the record, and please begin your testimony.
Good morning, Mark Overwise. Good morning, Councilman Chairman Jones and members of the Philadelphia City Council and the Committee of Public Safety. My name is Mark Overwise. I'm a captain in the Philadelphia Police Department. I've been a police officer for 29 years. I'm currently assigned as the commanding officer of the Accident Investigation District, a position that I've held for the last 3 years. And I wish to thank Councilman Thomas for inviting me here before you today to testify about this important issue. The Philadelphia Police Department is the primary and most essential resource to combat violent crime and ensure public safety for all Philadelphians and visitors to this great city. Every year, an average of 58,000 traffic crashes are reported to the Philadelphia Police Department. And yearly, the Accident Investigation District investigates about 2,300, and we also process about 3,100 DUI arrests. As the councilman mentioned, last year we experienced a 76% increase in traffic deaths from 2019 to 2020. That's compared with New York City, for example, a 3% increase that they experienced. So with that in mind, please consider the following: that a motor vehicle plays a dominant role in the lives of most Americans, and most Americans rely on transportation in some form for some aspect of their lives. A motor vehicle is also one of the most common modes used by criminal actors to commit a crime. For 100 years, the Philadelphia Police Department has carried the responsibility of investigating motor vehicle crashes as part of the larger picture of overall public safety, and will continue to play a primary role in investigating, analyzing, reducing, and preventing crime and traffic collisions. Over the last 20 years, the capacity of AID has been reduced by 1/5, while the annual traffic fatality rate is maintained relatively stable. A desire for streets to be safer from violent crime and traffic injuries and deaths is something that we all share. However, the police department's ability to hold drivers accountable is minuscule. For example, AID can only investigate about 4% of the total reported crashes to the police department. The reality is that AID lacks the capacity to investigate and follow up on the majority of the reported crashes, and the result is clearly visible. It's demonstrated by the willingness of drivers to engage in dangerous, aggressive, careless, and sometimes even reckless behaviors throughout the narrow streets of our neighborhoods. And then they leave the scene of the crash because the consequences are nil. Today, the risk of leaving the scene of a crash is overshadowed by the likelihood of getting away with it. Just as important as the amount and frequency of traffic collisions in our city is where they occur and what else occurs in those same areas. At the end of this presentation, it should be clear that traffic problems and crime problems are linked by location and several other factors that should decide how city responds. I'll share this slide presentation with you. And for the sake of time, I'll advance a couple of slides because the first 5 slides just describe how a crash is reported from local police departments to PennDOT. This here is a 4-year snapshot of how AID investigates crashes and the amount that we investigate. All right, as I said, about 2,300 per year that we investigate, and average before 2020 was 95 fatal crashes per year.
Is there a slide?
It's not sharing?
No.
I'm sorry. I apologize for that. I thought it was sharing here. Can we see that?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize for that.
That's quite all right.
This is a 4-year snapshot of our investigations.
Captain Overwise, I think we're still seeing your window explorer, not the presentation itself.
Can't see any of that, huh?
So I see maps, but they're very small.
Yeah, we see your presentation slides, but in a view that doesn't allow us to see them on screen, really. If you'll go into presentation mode or something, that might help.
I was trying to do. I have it up on my screen. I apologize.
Captain, I wonder if you're sharing the wrong screen. Do you have more than one screen?
Yeah.
Maybe if you switch the screens that were being shared or drug the presentation over to a different window.
How's this?
You'll still need to share the screen. We don't see anything right now.
I apologize. Ms. Williams, if you could help me out, if you have a copy of this presentation, I can tell you how to advance the slides.
Okay, let me try.
Because I have it up here, but it's not. Just for the sake of time, I'll continue.
Hey, Stephanie.
Yeah, you all have the presentation, so could somebody show it?
That's what we're trying to
So-
do. We didn't
Thank you.
assume
Okay.
he couldn't show the PowerPoint.
Okay, there it is.
Yep. Bye.
Hello?
Can we see
Can
that?
everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, just let me know which slide to advance.
Can you advance to slide number 8, please?
This one?
Slide number 8 should have the police symbol. All right, this is just a flow chart of, all right, that's number 6.
Okay, sorry, I can't see the
Eight,
numbers
okay.
from my
All
vantage
right,
point.
I just want to acknowledge the work of the research and analysis team for helping me put the slides together. You can advance to the next slide. Slide number 9. There we go. The map on the right, that's a density map that uses bolder colors to demonstrate increases in density, higher densities. So 2020 had a lower year overall compared to the 5 years for hit and run crashes, but an increase in the most serious crashes, which were crashes involving injuries or towing. Next slide, please. Again, the map to the right demonstrates where the reported hit and run crashes occurred, and the areas circled indicate higher densities. And notice those areas because you'll see them again across several categories. You can advance to the next slide. And these are hit and run density maps for the years 2016 through 2020, and they're merely indistinguishable from one another because of the patterns that emerge year after year with hit and run crashes. Next slide. The next slide shows the same 5-year period showing only the hit and run crashes with injury or towing, the most severe ones, and that's the one that's highlighted in the table there. Again, notice where the circles are, where the increased densities are. The next slide, over 58,000 traffic crashes are reported to the Philadelphia Police Department. As Councilman Thomas has said, 1 in every 4 is a hit and run, meaning that it underscores the need for enhanced investigative capabilities so that the police department can hold drivers more accountable. The next slide, Title 75 of the Pennsylvania Consolidated Statutes is the Motor Vehicle Code, and these are the sections that apply to hit and run crashes. 3744 describes the duties of a driver who was involved in a crash. Simply stated, the duties are to remain on location, report the crash, and render aid, and those last two can be accomplished by calling 911. Section 3743 relates to crashes involving unoccupied vehicles or property. Section 3745 relates to crashes involving occupied vehicles or property without injuries. And Section 3742 relates to crashes involving injury or death. And on the next slide, we have the penalties. And these are motor vehicle code penalties. So if the crash involves a death, it's a felony in the second degree. There's a minimum term of imprisonment of not less than 3 years, a mandatory minimum fine of 25 years. If the crash involves serious bodily injury, then it's a felony in the third degree. Prison to not less than 90 days and a minimum fine of $1,000. Otherwise, a violation of this section is a misdemeanor in the first degree. For crashes that involve damage to occupied vehicles or property, that's a misdemeanor in the third degree, punishable by a fine of $2,500 or imprisonment for not more than 1 year, or both. And for crashes involving damage to unattended vehicle or property, it's a summary offense or a traffic ticket, and that's a $300 fine or imprisonment for not more than 90 days or both. We can advance to the next slide. Crime and traffic patterns are very similar in Philadelphia. For example, Philadelphia's homicide rate and violent crime rates increased in 2020, and the fatal traffic crash rates increased as well. This graphic compares the fatalities investigated by AID from 2019 to 2020. Notice the percentage of hit and run fatalities, how they increased from 2019 to 2020. It's a 211% increase in hit and run fatalities. Somehow we managed to increase our solvability rate, but that rate is still low. The next slide, please. The maps on this slide depict violent crime and traffic crashes compared to one another for the first 3 quarters of 2019 and for 2020. Across the top is 2019, and you'll notice that the density of violent crimes and the density of crashes with injuries are very similar on both years. Again, on the right side, it's shooting victims. Again, the same neighborhoods are affected by crime and crashes, and this pattern is predictable. The next slide, please. So this table was used to create the graphic on the previous slide. You notice that the districts that were highlighted all had increases in both crashes with injury, shooting victims, and violent crime, except with a few, with the next slide. And those districts only saw modest or minor decreases in the violent crime category. So the next slide uses maps that show bolder colors that demonstrate increased density. And there are 4 categories here. However, when you look at the color and where the densities are concentrated, the maps are, again, almost undistinguishable from one another. The next slide, I reveal the categories for you to tell you that from left to right, they are traffic crashes, minority population, hit and run crashes, and violent crime. It's clear that the same neighborhoods that experience violent crime and have a severe traffic safety problem are the same areas where minority residents are concentrated. And using this data and other data, a plan or a strategy can be developed to address both problems simultaneously. The next slide is one example. It is the data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety policing model. This model was piloted here in 2012, and in 2012 we saw a 38% decrease in crime and a 15% decrease in traffic crashes in the areas targeted for the pilot. And I think those are results that we could all love to see today. This is a model that is based on statistical data. It's not based on traditional people-based police models. The next slide, please. With respect to hit and run crashes, there are a few more items that are worth mentioning. And according to the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, their research, drivers involved in hit and run fatalities are more likely to be young males and have a history of prior DUI offenses and license suspension. They tend to drive older model cars, suggesting that they have a lower socioeconomic status, and they also almost always have a positive blood alcohol content at the time of the arrest. Countermeasure this, the accident investigation conducts several DUI enforcement activities throughout the year. These are funded by the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, administered by PennDOT. Next slide has other hit and run countermeasures. Kevin's Law was signed by Governor Corbett in 2014, which increased the mandatory minimum sentence from 1 year to 3 years for leaving the scene of a crash with a fatality. This also closed a loophole which gave drivers who were intoxicated incentive to leave the crash. Senator Anthony Williams last year introduced Senate Bill 54, which would require investigating law enforcement agencies to alert vehicle repair facilities in Pennsylvania via a system developed by PennDOT. And Senate Bill 55 would expand the current Amber Alert system to include hit and run advisories, which are also known as J alerts. Next slide, please. Enhanced investigative capabilities for the Accident Investigation District require more resources in the way of staff and equipment. I proposed to increasing the staff of AID from the current 36 officers and supervisors to 53 officers and supervisors, so that the unit can divide the investigative tasks and assign special investigators to the most serious crashes. The line platoon investigators can investigate the less serious crashes and handle the DUI offenses. This increase would be equal to 8 more than what we had in 2000, and that's the table on the far left. It's our distribution in 2000. On the right is our actual distribution in black and the proposed distribution in blue. AID would also benefit and perform more efficiently with improvements in technology. Forensic mapping and enhanced response equipment are some of the examples that we're exploring to acquire via funding from grant sources. Next slide. We use many resources to make decisions about deployment. One thing that we don't have in this category is human research. The human element is unexplored. After all, we're talking about human behavior here. When somebody decides to leave a crash, I think we could benefit from partnering with a local university to explore that and find measures to mitigate that behavior. The last slide, I'll close. Again, I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to participate with you today in this hearing that addresses a very serious issue of hit and run crashes in Philadelphia. And I hope that the information provided to you today will emphasize that hit and run crashes are only a small part of a much larger problem that requires a sophisticated but achievable solution. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony. If it's okay with the committee, I don't think we should continue to the next person to testify. There was a lot of information given. If it's okay, maybe we can kind of do a Q&A now. Is that all right with the rest of the committee? Hearing no opposition, I assume it's okay. You gave us a lot, and some stats jumped out at me. What percentage of hit and runs or crashes that are serious are the result of someone fleeing the scene of a crime or in a carjacking?
I'm sorry, Councilman, I don't have that information. That is an interesting subject. I'll make a note of it and try and get it to you, but I don't know how easy it would be to obtain that information, especially when you consider that leaving the scene crashes are very difficult to solve to begin with.
So what percentage of fleeing the scene crashes have we solved? You gave me a lot of information.
Okay, so 28% of the total reported crashes are leaving the scene, which means 1 in every 4 crashes, regardless of the severity, are leaving the scene crash in Philadelphia. For hit and run fatalities, we had 9 in 2019. We had 28 in 2020. That's a 211% increase. That's for the fatalities.
All right. Member Thomas, would you like to pursue questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Sergeant, right? I'm sorry.
Captain, but that's
Captain.
okay.
I'm sorry, Captain Overwatch, for being here today and being a part of this conversation. Just a few questions to get your opinion on some things and to kind of maybe do a deeper dive. In the midst of the presentation, there were some parallels drawn between socioeconomic status, gun violence, and some of the car accidents that we've seen. I'm wondering, considering that 1 in 4 are hit and runs, and we're not doing a good job solving a lot of the crimes that we face, why do we feel like socioeconomic status actually plays a role in this? Again, when number 1, we're not solving a lot. Number 2, a lot aren't being reported as well too. So we know that there's an issue as far as reporting hit and runs, but then we also know that there's an issue as far as solving them. So I'm wondering what that parallel has to do with some of the information that was presented today. Because like Councilmember Jones said, it was a lot. I think it was a lot. It was a lot of
Yeah, so that particular piece was what I gave you from the AAA research. Let me get the title for you. The AAA Foundation on Traffic Safety conducted research several years ago, and that is one of the things that they found, is that the driver who was likely to leave the scene of a fatal crash, it involved a young male who was in a lower socioeconomic status, who drove an older model vehicle and tended to have a blood alcohol content at the time of the crash. That's not, again, it's not my research. I grabbed that just to demonstrate that that's probably one of the things that we should target for trying to mitigate.
No, thank you, Captain. I appreciate that. But, it's important for us to put information on the record, and that's something that jumped out to be. So I just want to go ahead and push back on that narrative first. because we do have a lot of inconclusive information that we can all agree that's out there as we look to study this issue. You said that we had 28 fatalities last year, which again is unfortunate, and I can only imagine what it means to be on the scenes and talk to those parents and other folks involved in the losses. How many of those 28 fatalities led to an actual arrest of a suspect?
The 28 hit and run fatalities have been solved, not actually led to an arrest yet, because in some of them we are waiting for arrest warrants, but it was 36%, if I have it correctly.
Wait, I'm confused. I'm sorry. So you said so 36% of the 28 have been solved, or 28 have been solved, which is 36% of the total amount. I'm a little confused. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The total hit and run fatalities, 28 of them. So there's 28 total hit and run fatalities. I confused myself there. We solved 36% of them.
36% of the 28. Okay.
Yes.
So okay, that's what I'm asking. I do have other questions, Mr. Chair. I see other colleagues are queued up because I want to shift directions a little bit in my next series of questions. So I'll pass it to my colleagues, but I definitely would love to come back to ask Captain Overwise just a few more questions about some infrastructure stuff.
That'll be fine, Member Thomas. Chair recognizes Member Goudier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also wanted to thank and commend Councilmember Thomas for having this hearing. It's a really important topic that we have to dig into as a city. Captain Overwise, I really appreciated the data that you showed that aligned, a lot of what we're seeing in terms of traffic safety and traffic incidents with gun violence. It was striking to see it that way from a hard data perspective, because anecdotally, that's what we're finding in our district. We have probably a list of requests, 60 blocks long at least, for safety interventions in the same areas where we're experiencing very high levels of gun violence. And I just hope that, I know that you're asking for more resources for enforcement, and I definitely think that we have to look into enforcement and how we can be better there. But I also hope that as a city, we can raise the priority level with which we address these neighborhoods through infrastructure improvements. In my mind, these neighborhoods that are already under siege due to gun violence should be top on the list with streets and with Otis in terms of the traffic improvements that they're asking for. And I hope that we can work towards that. But thank you so much for the data that you showed. It was very illuminating. I wanted to ask about a specific case, and I understand if you don't have the information with you today, but one of the reasons I'm so grateful for this hearing is that, what we saw in 2020 played out in a very tragic way in the 3rd District. Avante Reynolds, 25-year-old mother, was struck and killed on Cobbs Creek Parkway. Yes. And it was such a tragic event. It did spur, the community and the elected officials and our city agencies and state agencies to action. So since that time, my office has worked with State Rep McClinton, Senator Williams, Councilmember Johnson, and even our Register of Wills with Streets and PennDOT to get improvements out there to the Parkway pretty quickly. But I have to admit, I'm in the dark about the actual investigation, and I was wondering if you could share any information now, or if you could follow up with my office with information.
I can certainly follow up with your office. We did take custody of a vehicle that we believe was involved. We lack enough information to say for certain that it was a vehicle that was involved, so we still have investigative work to do there. And in terms of the infrastructure, I'll leave that to Ms. Reynolds, but what I will say is that with improved technology, forensic mapping, for example, we can assist Streets, Otis, with the data that they need to make those improvements in infrastructure.
Okay, I get what you're saying. Thank you so much for your work and for all the information you shared today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member. Chair recognizes Member Brooks.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the frequency of hit and run vehicular accidents amongst communities of color and the correlation with increased gun violence. Why do you believe that we're seeing these increases in both of these crimes at the similar rates?
I wish I had the answer to that for you, Councilwoman. What I can say is that they're linked by location. Whatever it is about those locations where crime and traffic collisions collide, we need to investigate that and figure out why and try and find solutions to mitigate that. Like I said, our advanced investigative capabilities on our end can help with some of that data, so that research and analysis can help the police commissioner and deputy commissioners develop solutions to address those problems. As I sit here today, I wish I knew the answer to that. We wouldn't be sitting here having this hearing if we did.
Have you guys had an opportunity to compare just like neighborhood complaints around those certain areas, around whether it's traffic concerns or construction or, all of these other things with the data around these hit and runs?
I have not.
Because my concern is like some of the data that can be gathered around what's happening in communities, it could be directly related to a lot of other things that we see happening in our communities that you may be able to get that information from community members when it comes to safety. So I was just...
Right. And I don't get the opportunity to communicate with a lot of the district captains. I'm sure they have a lot of that information that you asked about. I don't get the opportunity to communicate with them very much about that. Again, everything that I do gets overshadowed by the violence, the gun violence and the violent crime.
Okay. Thank you so much, Captain.
Sure.
Thank you, Member Brooks. Before I recognize Member Gim, can you, for purposes of illustration, what happens from the time we recognize a hit and run? What is the steps and procedures in particular? Is there an analysis of the intersection or street where it happened?
So that happens later on, sir. I meet monthly with Ms. Reynolds and Kelly Eamon, and we go over the fatalities that occur the month before, and we discuss what contributing factors that we know at the time contributed to that. And that kind of analysis happens a lot with Otis. From the time we get a call, my officers respond. And one of the first things we do after we process the scene and talk to any witnesses is to go out and survey for video. That requires a lot of legwork and a lot of time. And as I showed you with our staffing distributed the way it is, sometimes that's a challenge. I do get help from the divisional detectives and from the districts in that case, because actually they're more familiar with where the video is located based on their previous assignments than we are. So I do get help with that. That's where we start.
So for example, I think it's Broad and Glenwood. Every other month, somebody's hit there. And it was so bad that I almost in one instance thought I was hearing an old report because the circumstances were very similar. I think the time of day would matter. So like if it's 2 a.m. and people tend to think they're the only one on the highway, that should matter. Weather conditions should matter. Whether or not traffic lights were operational should matter. Whether or not, I heard you say, cameras could capture what happened for investigation purposes. That should matter. I was wondering if there is a standard, all right, fatality, we're on scene, and maybe a 10-point checklist that you have, which is standard, that you can share.
Not that I can share with you. I wasn't prepared for that question. We do have a protocol that we follow for fatal crashes. It's basically the same for any crash that we investigate. The fatality just means that we use more resources in a shorter amount of time to try and solve that, especially when it's a hit and run.
All right. Would you please at some point provide that to the chair so that I can provide that to members of this committee so that as we circle back on budget, we can ask these questions again. Chair recognizes Member Gim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Captain Overwise, could you just clarify something that you said earlier? I just want to make sure I understood you clearly. Did you say that you had trouble with staffing in terms of reaching out for video camera footage, or are you talking more about a lack of video camera footage?
No. What I was saying was that trying to track down video camera footage takes a lot of legwork and it takes a lot of time, especially when you get one source of video, then you have to spiderweb out to try and get that next source of video and to continue that chain until you get a good enough piece of video to get a description out there. One of the better examples is the crash that happened at St. Vincent and Somerdale Street. We just got a $20,000 reward approved for that, and we announced it on the news the other day. That required a lot of legwork, and I actually got help from the family of Sai Shang Lin, who helped us with that. That help was invaluable because, again, they went and they found video of the person walking away. And without that picture, we still don't have any good tips on that, but without that picture there, we would be very hard-pressed to solve that. I hope that somebody sees that and can recognize that person and give us a call.
So I just wanted to clarify, because I know the city is talking about additional monies for the possibility of more surveillance cameras. And is there a feeling that if there were more city-funded cameras that would assist at these high rate of
Sure.
run intersections?
Right. In areas where we do see a lot, it would help us to put more cameras there. A lot of times we get unlucky because these cameras, they pan automatically. And sometimes we're lucky, sometimes we're not lucky. Sometimes we see the crash on those city cameras. Sometimes the camera pans away right before we see what we need to see in order to get that good information. They would help.
One question that I also had is, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but did you have an analysis on time of day for hit and runs?
I did not break this down by time, just by location. We could further break it down by time. I can ask our research and analysis to do that so that we get the 3 8-hour periods, for example, to see when they happen. That would be helpful. I didn't have it for this presentation, but we can get it. It's not a big task to get.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a little bit about whether if a intersection is well known to be unmanned and to have, kind of a lot of neglect around it, whether it doesn't really matter what time of day it is. It's just kind of, a place where anything can happen. And unfortunately, it too frequently does. But I'm also interested in a little bit about, some of the time of day issues. And related to that, what is the current status of the school crossing guards within the police department? Is it currently housed with your department, or has it formally been
I don't have that answer.
To OIG? To Otis, rather.
I don't have that answer. I'm sorry.
I'll ask that of Mr. Pachalski.
Councilman, it's Matt White from the Police Commissioner's Office. The school crossing guards are housed within the police department, but I don't have any information prepared on the status of the crossing guard unit, but I'm happy to jot down any specific questions you have and get your answers.
It's just my understanding that at some point the school crossing guard unit was to transfer over into Otis because, this is a longstanding concern that we've certainly brought in. When Councilmember Gautier talks about particular neighborhoods being neglected, one of the things that we recognize is that the presence of adults within a community, and school crossing guards certainly count as a 4 to 6 hour position. I'm not exactly clear. It might just be a 4-hour position, but at multiple points during the day. I think it's a 6-hour position because it's 2 hours in the morning. I think it could be an hour or so in the middle of the day, and then 2 hours at the end of the day. A regular presence of adult personnel, and to be clear, there's an allocation of well over 1,000 school crossing guards across the district. Our issue with with the police department is that we have traditionally had huge numbers of vacancies at extremely dangerous intersections. And so again, what we're trying to underscore is these are budgeted positions within the department. We have talked for a long time about challenges with civil service, difficulties in training, the low level of positioning. But most importantly, I think what it speaks to is that there isn't really somebody at the police department who has had the kind of attention and care for an issue which could put 1,000 individuals, which is obligated actually, to put many different adults at core intersections where young people and families routinely cross as many as 3 times a day. And to some extent, having an adult on those corners each and every day during the school year is a reminder that this is a place of community. This is a place for children. These are a place of families. And the routine and regular presence has been a really important issue for us. The issue with the police department is that these are unfunded, these are not.
1 or 2 sporadically on day work. Is that fatalities?
Excuse me, one moment, Captain. Your mic is on.
You might not be muted. One of the issues is that there are just a huge number of vacancies. And so I know there was discussion about moving them to Otis. Would like to hear, a little bit of feedback on that. And again, where you think the status of the crossing guards might currently be within your department.
Thank you, Councilmember. I do agree that the school crossing guards are an extremely important part.
Say your name again for the record.
I'm sorry, it's Matthew White.
Thank you.
I do agree completely that the school crossing guards are a core part of our communities and a fixture in neighborhoods. I'm certainly happy to look into both the issue of the status of where crossing guards will be housed as a position and also the status of the number of vacancies and to the extent that we can break it down by location and if those are also particularly dangerous intersections, I'm happy to look into all of those matters and get you a direct answer.
That's fine. We've been working on this issue for a while directly with Commissioner Coulter, but we do really want to underscore that it's another area, to my colleagues about neighborhoods that should be supported, should have the presence of adults in them and are, again, areas where we see vacancies. And it really does need to be valued. And if we, I want to see where the discussions are with transferring the unit over to Otis, if the police department, it just may not be a priority. So we're willing to acknowledge that, but it does need to be taken care of in other places if it's not a priority for the PPD. So thank you very much.
Thank you, member. And those were 2 important points that I took note of. One, crossing guards. On 63rd and Race, there was a hit and run fatality a couple years back of a tender age youth. And it was at an intersection where there should have been a crossing guard. And then the second thing to underscore is time of day or time of night. That might be relevant if you're looking at the closing of bars and taverns and what happens during those hours. And so much so that you can maybe even compensate by adjusting the patterns of street lights. So Walnut Street and Chestnut Street in the 3rd district are hidden highways that might be thought about in that regard. So anyway, we're circling back around to Member Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Councilmember Gim actually just talked about the idea of more cameras and the possibility of more cameras helping. Can you help us explain? We've seen some reports that talked about the fact that even when the evidence is there and the constituent themselves is able to gather evidence of a hit and run, that information still doesn't get investigated. So can you explain to us why only 5% of hit and run crashes are actually investigated? And then also, if we do increase the number of cameras as far as surveillance, how will we then be able to address the issue if we're only investigating about 5% of hit and runs right now? How can we say cameras will help us address this issue if even when people are sending us the footage that they have, we're still not able to offer viable consequences currently?
You make a good point that people do give us video, and sometimes the quality of the video is not good enough to get an identification. And so it's not that we don't investigate. I think the one news report that you're referring to, the officers failed to call my unit, and that's why we didn't investigate right away. However, we did after we were notified about it. But quality of video is important. And as I said before, with the city cameras, sometimes we're lucky we get that tag, which really what we need is the tag and a good description of the vehicle or driver. And that's the other thing, too, is that we have to be able to put a specific driver behind the wheel of that vehicle. It's not enough to find the vehicle. I have several vehicles in custody that we can't identify a driver for. And, that's our next step. We have to identify who was driving that vehicle at the time of the crash. Very difficult to solve compared to violent crimes where often there's a nexus between the actor and the victim. People meet in crashes by happenstance. So there's no connection between the two parties, and we don't have anything to go on investigatively to try and solve that. We have to rely on pictures, good video, good witnesses, and solid identification before we can get an arrest warrant.
So putting our fiscal hat on, thinking about this with a solution lens, right? Are you, Captain, recommending that us as council members look at some level of investment into technology and cameras? And can you assure us that investment in technology and cameras will put us in a position where we will be able to address this issue? Because I know this is something that Councilmember Gim brought up, and I think that throughout your testimony and listening to your response today, your suggestion that more cameras will help address this issue. But again, I don't know. I don't know if we have faith in that particular position for this problem. And I don't know if it could be a solution or it couldn't be. But I just want you to go on record with your recommendation as it relates to a solution, because again, I know you talked about increasing staff from maybe 36 people to 53 people. But we want to be innovative and creative as it relates to how we figure this stuff out. So what are some suggestions that you think, even if with cameras, without cameras, what are suggestions that you feel like we can do to address this issue without increasing staff?
That's a good question, because the chance of increasing staff in my unit is very slim. So what we need to do is force multipliers in a way of technology, which I described earlier. I'm working on a proposal, a grant concept. It's a $300,000 proposal. It's a lot of equipment, but it's equipment that would help us in a way of solving the crashes and also holding drivers accountable, because let's not forget, we're talking about hit and runs, but if we prevent all crashes or do our best to prevent all crashes, we're going to prevent hit and runs as well. So what we need to do is get the data to our research and analysis team to tell us how to go do that. And the way to do that is with enhanced investigative capabilities. And that's where the technology comes in. Right now, we use wheels and tape measures to measure out a crime scene, and we sketch them by hand because we don't have a forensic mapping system that can do the work of two people in a very short period of time. And that's what I mean by a force multiplier.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate it. So as we look into this idea of training, because I know that there was a report that you were a part of that talked about the use of training as it relates to staffing. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that as it relates to training? Can you talk to us a little bit about who you feel like should get training and what training can do to address this issue?
Okay. Well, the members of my unit have 3 levels of training that I have not been able to get. I had people scheduled, but the pandemic hit and everything got canceled. But there's 3 levels of training, and that's on-scene crash investigation, and then there's technical analysis, and then there's crash reconstruction. Crash reconstruction is the most advanced form of training. All this, again, helps us to get data that we use to supply to PennDOT and to research analysis to get better information on the crashes. And PennDOT uses that information to develop programs for traffic safety.
I think it's important that we're conscious of who we're using as it relates to collecting data, research, and information. I mean, you referenced the AAA Foundation earlier, and I, again, really want to push back on the socioeconomic side. Even looking at the map that you put out there in the midst of your presentation, I remember there being a lot of incidents as it relates to hit and runs and things of that capacity in the North Philadelphia area, right? So thinking about North Philadelphia, for example, and I'm sure Councilmember Gaudier can relate to this comparison in her district. If we have an area like North Philadelphia that we know is populated with a lot of college students, how can we tie socioeconomic status to this particular issue? Because I think what it begins to do is when we use stats like this, it begins to kind of open the door for more illegal stop and frisk in the city of Philadelphia. And I think that's a significant problem that we have as it relates to our city. We do a ton of stop and frisking, specifically people who look like me, but that method clearly is A, not addressing the gun violence issue because we clearly still have an epidemic on our hands, and B, not addressing the traffic issue because, again, we've seen more fatalities last year than what we've seen in recent history. So in the midst of the research that we're doing, and in the midst of thinking about how do we address this issue, I'm wondering about the racial and equity lens and how those conversations are taking place. Because, again, I can tell you a personal narrative of someone who I know who unfortunately was hit and it led to a fatality right outside the police district at Broad Godfrey. I could look at the socioeconomic status of the people who live in that neighborhood, but if you live in that neighborhood, you know that people coming from Abington flies up and down Broad Street all hours of the night. And if that crime remain unsolved, because we said 36% of cases are solved, but that means that over 60% aren't solved, 64% exactly aren't solved. So how can we tie, socioeconomic status to something like that when the economic status of the neighborhood might be one thing, but the person who could have hit that person could be a millionaire from Abington who was speeding from Center City going out of town. So again, I really just want to push back and hear your perspective, Captain, as it relates to how we think about these things through a lens that has some level of racial equity.
All right, sir. So traffic safety is an investment. Right. When you said the socioeconomic status, again, that was one research that I pointed to from AAA, and that's their research. I agree with you 100% that the driver can be from anywhere. And one of the things that I talked about with Otis, and they'll tell you the same thing, is we're trying to figure out what zip codes that folks involved in crashes are coming from, where they live, because it does make a difference. It just seems that where you have neighborhoods that are low income, and the data shows that those neighborhoods are populated with minorities. All these things are happening in the same location, and that's the common thread, is that location. And so I think budget-wise, if you do not make an investment in traffic safety in those locations, then you're perhaps doing a disservice to the people in those locations.
So I don't disagree with that at all, and I think that investment is significant. It should happen. It's important. But again, I think if you look at it through a certain perspective, what that investment looks like can look very, very different, right? Like an investment could be somewhat predatory if done the wrong way. So again, I'm really concerned about this issue because what I don't want us to do is use this as a means and a mechanisms to over-police communities of color, right? Like we know that there's a gun violence issue, and if we want to do a deeper dive into that, I would love to, because we're not going to resolve the issue of gun violence by over-policing neighborhoods. Like that's never going to be a way we resolve gun violence. It could be a way you temporarily stop some things happening on a particular block and in a particular neighborhood, but gun violence is a bigger symptom of other issues that we have related to poverty, poor education, and a lack of resources going into communities that they didn't necessarily get. So if we're saying that we need to invest in neighborhoods to prevent these issues, again, I just don't want that investment to happen through a predatory lens, right? This is a hearing that I feel like is important. It's a conversation that I know we need to have, but I feel it moving into a direction that I feel like is not advantageous to the people that we're essentially trying to serve. So that's why I really want to just take a couple moments to get some of this stuff on the record. And I understand, Captain, that you was just referencing one study, but it's our job, it's our obligation as members of council to kind of pay attention to the detail and push back on things that could put us in a position where we could hurt the same people that we're trying to help. I didn't hear clear recommendations, though, outside of technology. Do you have any other clear recommendations that you feel like outside of technology can put us in a position where we can address this issue? I'll give you an example. I talked to a lot of people. Actually, Councilmember Jones, he forced me to go on a bike tour, and I probably should do it again because I need the cardio. But in the midst of that tour, one of the things that they talked to us about was infrastructure issues in cities, right? So they talked to us about roads and neighborhoods that we should think about trying to change as it relates to how wide they are, because they said when roads are wide and there's not a lot of lights or anything in between. People tend to drive faster. So what are your thoughts on maybe some infrastructure investment? We said 12% of the roads in the city of Philadelphia are where the majority of the crashes happen. Has there been any dialogue around some serious investment around those 12% of roads from an infrastructure perspective? I understand the technology side, but what do we think of that?
I think that's a question that's better answered by Otis.
Friendly amendment. On them same roads that the member has talked about, some of them are state highways. So if you look at Henry Avenue, you look at Roosevelt Boulevard, if you look at some of those areas, add to his question how you are coordinating with state authorities to make them safer.
Okay.
And I know we'll hear from Otis later, but again, Captain, you're an expert, right? Like you talked about this on news stations. You've been doing this for decades now. You know, your opinion and your perspective on this stuff really matters. So, of course, we're going to ask Otis, you know, what they think as far as infrastructure investment. But I think your opinion and your perspective matters just as much as theirs. So I don't want you to punt it to Otis. We'll get to them. They'll have.
I'm not trying to punt it, sir. I just don't think that I appreciate the fact that you call me an expert, but I don't think I'm an expert at all. I just, like I said, I've been doing this in this position for the last 3 years. All right. When it comes to recommendations, I recommend that you give my unit the ability to get as much data to Otis as possible so that they can make those recommendations, because we're not engineers, we're investigators. So if we can get the data to Otis and then they can make those decisions, they'll all help to contribute to making our roads safer.
Thank you. My last question, and then I think we can move on to other council members. I think they have other questions too. We know that we have traffic officers coming down the pipeline at some point. And we know that those traffic officers, as of now, have a specific focus in, I believe, Center City. What are your thoughts on traffic officers being used as a mechanism to essentially address this issue? If the traffic officer, similar to what Councilmember Gim talked about earlier, you know, had a lens that came out of the managing director's office or something like that, clearly weren't armed or anything like that. But what about innovative ways of putting people like that in neighborhoods and in places where we see a high density as it relates to hit and runs and traffic and things like that? I would love to hear your opinion on that as well, Captain.
So you're talking about the traffic district in the Philadelphia Police Department?
Well, no. We know that we have traffic officers that are specifically going to be focused on, the Center City area. We know that the traffic officers are going to start in Center City, and they're going to start with the focus of addressing congestion and a lot of the congestion and the traffic that we see in Center City. What I'm asking you is if a similar model, right? These are unarmed people. These are folks that are working out of the managing director's office. They'll have a different level of training. They'll come from a totally different budget. What if a similar model were used in some of these places where you talked about that had areas of a high correlation of traffic incidents and gun violence, right? So what if we had a different type of tactical person, whatever you want to call them? They could be called traffic officers. They could be called community liaisons. I don't care what you call them. But what if we took that similar investment and put it in these areas where we've seen high density incidents, specifically the areas that you drew the correlation between gun violence and high traffic incidents? What are your thoughts on that? And that would be my final question for this witness, Mr. Chair.
I would say that in high crime areas that you could use the people that you just talked about to displace the people from Center City so that the uniformed officers could address the problems in high crime areas. Beyond that, I'm not in a position as the captain of the accident investigation unit to speak about that. That's a deployment decision. That's not at my level.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Thomas. We're going to go with Member Brooks, Member Gardier, and then Member Gim. And then we're going to segue to the next panel because I think we have 9 more panels or 9 more testimonies. Is that right, Ms. Williams?
Something like that, yes. Maybe 8.
Okay. Member Brooks?
Thank you so much. I just need clarification, kind of to the line of questioning by Councilmember Thomas. Am I clear that currently there's not coordination between PPD and Otis around solving hit and runs to determine whether there's a correlation between traffic, engineering, the need for speed bumps, or whatever currently happening? Because I'm thinking, I don't want to speak for my district council people, but I'm pretty sure they can spell out high risk areas in their districts. And those high risk areas, as an at-large person, also probably correlate with the requests from community members around speed bumps, school crossing signs, the need for school crossing guards during the day, the need for more lighting, and the need for, I'm trying to think of the fancy word the urban issues, where they have the curb cuts that I only see in Center City and West Philly. I have yet to see one in North Philly. I think it's called gas lighting or tree lighting or some kind of lighting term that the urban issues. So my concern is if previously or currently, prior to creating this report, if coordination was not done with Otis around the need for investments into traffic infrastructure in some of these same areas, I'm not understanding why we're asking for a larger investment or this conversation about more technology when there are other things that has been missing around infrastructure in these communities, like the school crossing guards that Councilmember Gim talked about. And I've been on the front line of fighting for a school crossing guard at the expressway at 15th and St. Luke, right? So these are like real live issues that people from the community can talk about. So if that hasn't been done, up to this point, I'm kind of confused of, what are we talking about around cameras if we haven't made the real investment in these communities of color, which are also primarily, where increased gun violence is seen. That's why earlier I asked you about, the correlation between the two. But as I'm hearing, I'm not hearing the connect between traffic safety and policing being a solution to some of these vehicular homicides. And to somebody else mentioned about people flying from the suburbs. There was a 6-pound pileup at Broad Hunting Park, which is a high traffic area, and probably for hit and runs. And it was done by someone from Ben Salem and crashed up 6 cars of people that live in the neighborhood. So what would that investment look like? I mean, what would that investigation look like? Because the police never showed up at the scene. The young man was intoxicated. His family members drove from Ben Salem and picked him up. And no police were at the scene, but 6 community members' cars were totaled.
I'm not aware of that particular incident. That disturbs me that you tell me that. The only thing I can think of is that my unit wasn't notified, but I have to look into that. If you can give me the date, time, and location, I can follow up on that for you. As far as the coordinating with Otis, as I said before, I meet with them once a month and we discuss all the fatal crashes that happened in the months before, and then we come up with possible strategies, and then Otis takes it from there. I could help them better if I had, as I said before, better resources to get them the data that they need.
I will get you the information for that accident. I
appreciate that.
But I'll get you the information before this call is over.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Brooks. Member Gaudier, and then Member Gim.
I just wanted to, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I didn't take offense at Captain Overwise's charts showing the high number of traffic safety incidents that correlates with gun violence and with a high number of people of color and people in poverty being prevalent in the neighborhood. I do agree with Councilmember Thomas that it's important what we do with that data, right? And we should not be looking to just use that data to justify enforcement. But I also don't think that we should shy away from that data, because to me, what we saw on those charts is emblematic of a systematic disinvestment in these neighborhoods that has happened for decades. The same neighborhoods where we saw the traffic incidents are the same neighborhoods that were redlined. They're the same neighborhoods that have struggled throughout this entire COVID pandemic. People have gotten the most sick. People have lost their jobs the most. They're the same neighborhoods that that don't have as high access to quality schools, and they're the same neighborhoods where we've not invested in basic traffic and other types of infrastructure that could help with those issues. So I don't think that we should shy away from that reality. Instead, I think that information and that data needs to be instructive for us. It needs to be instructive for us as we move into budget season about what and who gets priority in this city. And I'm hopeful that as we look at neighborhoods that are under an incredible amount of stress from multiple crises at the same time, that's what we're going to prioritize. And that's what's going to, I hope, rise to the top. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Member Gim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask if Mr. White could come back, because I did just want to confirm that in our budget cycle, when we passed the budget last in June of 2020, there was an explicit note that the police department personnel would be in part reduced because of the transfer of the school crossing guard unit to Otis. And I wanted to ask Mr. White, it sounds like you are unaware of that and that has not occurred. Is that correct?
I am unaware as to whether it has or has not occurred. So I have made a note to look into the status of school crossing guards being transferred to Otis to get you an answer to the question.
Okay. And you are unaware of ever hearing that the administration's intent was to transfer the school crossing guards out of the PPD?
No, I do recall conversations of that nature taking place, I believe, during hearings in 2020.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
Councilmember. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other questions for this panel? Seeing none in the chat room, Ms. Williams, will you please read the name of the next panel to testify, or next person to testify?
Christopher Pohalski.
Hi. Good morning, council members. I'm going to share my screen now. I also have a PowerPoint presentation to go along with my testimony this morning. It says it's coming up. I hope it is. So my name is Christopher Pohalski. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Otis, the city's Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. And I'm joined by my colleague, Lily Reynolds. Lily?
Good morning. My name is Lily Reynolds, Deputy Director of the Office of Complete Streets with Otis, and I manage all of our Vision Zero program initiatives. Pleased to be here.
Thank you for your patience. Please begin.
Yeah, there was a lot of great ideas put forth, a lot of great discussion that we're listening. I don't know that I'll be able to address everything that you all touched on, but we hope to shed some more light on a lot of the issues that were just discussed with the captain. I want to start with our goal. Our goal is straight up eliminating all traffic deaths in the city of Philadelphia. When we think of a traffic death, you'll notice that we don't use the word accident. We use the word crash. We don't think these are just accidents. We think these are, we don't think they're a fact of life. We don't think they're inevitable. We think these are preventable incidents. I don't want to take away from the difficulty of achieving this. When we look at all the reasons, and you got to ask why 7 times before you really get to all the reasons. Some of these are really enormous in the difficulty to solve, but we do think that we can eliminate traffic deaths in the city of Philadelphia. Council Member Thomas, and I'd like to thank the council member for sponsoring the resolution, for bringing up this issue. This is an issue that is very ripe. It has not been discussed enough. Both the hit and runs and their overall traffic fatalities last year. Traffic fatalities were up 78% in 2020. This isn't something that goes up and down by a lot every year. You will see the trend line over about the last decade on this slide. And you'll see the increase that we saw in 2020 shown. The numbers for 2020 were literally off the chart. We had to make a new chart. That's how terrible 2020 was in Philadelphia in terms of traffic crashes. And the term is sometimes used in my field, traffic violence, when we think about the harm done to people from these preventable incidents. And I can only think that it was, all the other crises that our city faced is why this number, that's also important, did not probably get the attention that it deserves. But I'm glad we're talking about it today. This increase happened among all modes of transportation. The blue bars show the previous 5-year trend, and the yellow bars show what happened in 2020, and whether it was people walking, people riding a bike, people on a motorcycle, or people on an automobile. We saw dramatic increases, no matter how you were traveling, in traffic fatalities in 2020. Some of you might know, I spent 3 years working in the automotive industry, designing automobiles. The modern automobile is a marvel. I was just hearing on the news today that the marvel of auto engineering is why Tiger Woods is likely alive today and did not, pass away in the crash that he had yesterday or the day before. You have to be going very fast in an automobile to die. And so this shows the extreme issue that our city is facing, that automobile crashes, where you are well protected, went up 93% in 2020. We have a serious problem. This map shows, on the right, we have 2019 fatal crashes, and on the left, we have 2020, and we have them broken down between hit and run and non-hit and run crashes. And we see that there was a dramatic increase in hit and run crashes in 2020 versus the year before. This is the subject of our hearing today. This is important. Hit and run crashes, they shock the conscience. They are they show a lack of concern for our fellow resident. This behavior, leaving the scene, that they are heinous in a way, and so they are important. But I want to note that it's not just the hit and run crashes that went up. It's the non-hit and run crashes went from 76 to 115, and we think all of these are a tragedy. And the biggest tragedy is that someone died. It's heinous that the actor who's responsible left the scene, but our goal is to stop it before it happened, before there was a fatal, preventable incident. That's Otis's goal when we look at these numbers. So I think the hit and run conversation is very important. How to hold individuals accountable for their reckless behavior, for their demonstration of a lack of concern for their fellow person. But when we look at these numbers, we're trying to prevent all of them, not just when someone leaves the scene inappropriately. It's important to remember that these numbers are people. They represent real people. And so this came from this text and picture came from the Vision Zero plan, and I'll talk about it in a minute, that we put out in November. These are real people with families, with loved ones that lost their life. We got to keep thinking about them. These numbers like that. Every number is a person. And this is a case that you might know about. Tragic case. Gets me worked up every time I think about it. But the activism of Miss Bird's family has led to real improvements, has led to the introduction of speed cameras. So this is also a case of tragedy that that the people who knew this woman have really taken that tragedy and done something to help their fellow residents. We have a new action plan, a 2025 action plan. You know, we talk about what we have done over the last 3 years. So we put out our first action plan in 2017, and we updated it in November of 2020. So, you know, we have done a lot. I don't think we've done nearly enough. And the trend, the dramatic upward spike in 2020 shows that. And the lack, you know, that we haven't yet seen the dramatic decrease before that. So this is really just the initial down payment on the steps that we need to take to reduce, eliminate all traffic fatalities in our city, not just hit and runs. Like was discussed, it's not every street. 80% of the killed and serious injury crashes happen on 12% of our streets. And like the chair said, you know, some of these are city streets, but a lot are also PennDOT streets. And we need to work with PennDOT, with the state on addressing these issues. That adds added complication, of course, you know, but PennDOT, you know, has, you know, shown that they're willing to come to the table and work with us. But we can't stop. We can't slow down. We have made some progress. So the blue line are high injury network streets where we've done something. I wouldn't say all of them, you know, have been a dramatic change. Some of them have been significant, like the road diets on Chestnut Street, for example. Some of them have been more modest interventions. And then the pink lines show where we have something that is in the works, where we have a project that is in either planning or in design that we think will make a difference. But you'll notice here, we just, you know, the magnitude of the problem is much greater than the resources that we've been able to bring to bear to do the really hard work of finding a solution that will work for communities and that will address the traffic safety problems. And change is hard. Change is hard, and sometimes conversations about narrowing the streets, you know, that narrow streets are safer. That is counterintuitive, right? I think it's wide open. There's nothing to hit, right? And we come into the room and say, actually, this is more dangerous. It takes a while to build that trust. And as you know, trust in government is low. It's probably as low as it's ever been. So each of these projects takes a significant amount of work with the community. And that work isn't free, and it's not even cheap. You know, it takes a lot of staff hours, you know, of Lily's time really beating the bushes, having real conversations with people. So there's a lot of work to do. The blue document, that's the Vision Zero plan that we put out November last year. That lays out the overall policies. The yellow document that you see is the capital plan. We took 10 of the most dangerous intersections and 10 of the most dangerous corridors, and we started saying, you know, this is where we need to do a project. You know, this isn't even all of that high injury network, all of that 12%. This is just 10 intersections and 10 corridors that are particularly dangerous. And we want to move those corridors forward in the next 5 years. Let me talk a little bit about the approach. I think the approach traditionally, this is a conceptual diagram that comes from that blue document. The traditional approach has been mostly about behavior, telling people, hey, why don't you should do the right thing, right? This is the education, and this is enforcement. That's the traditional approach to traffic safety. And then, you know, a lesser effort about road design and about, you know, the safe vehicles. We think, you know, enforcement and education is part of the solution still, but we think it's a smaller part of the solution, and that designing our roads so that they compel people to drive in a safer way. And then also people are in safer vehicles. And that's just not, my former employer, selling you a safer car. That's also, to the extent possible, getting people on the bus and on the train and biking, where they're in a vehicle that is much less likely to, lead to a deadly crash. When you're on the bus, you are 10 to 18 times less likely to die or be seriously injured in a crash. So there's 4 parts of our strategy to reducing and eliminating traffic crashes. One is expanding automated speed enforcement, and I'll have some slides about that. The next one is setting safe speed limits. So right now we just don't have the ability, even as a city of the first class, to say, okay, I think the safe speed limit is 20 or 25 throughout the entire city. We have to do some laborious and with our hands tied behind our backs studies on each and every street to justify it. And that's, there's a lot of streets in the city of Philadelphia. So we need the ability to set what we know from best practice are safe speed limits. We need to pass the legislative tools at the state, but also at the local level, and to give us the ability to, move forward on these projects. And then lastly, we think this should be enshrined in the city code that traffic safety is important. So we're still developing the specifics here, but we'd like before the end of this administration to work with council on a Vision Zero ordinance that states, both policy-wise and sets up certain parameters that human life takes precedence over, saving 5 minutes, getting to the store, getting to work. You might have seen this graphic before. This was in our original report, and this just shows how critical slowing people down is. If I'm a pedestrian and I am hit by an automobile, and that automobile is going 20 miles an hour, I only have a 10% chance of dying. 10 miles an hour faster, I have a 50% chance of dying. And at 40, that car's going 40, I have a 90% chance of dying. So slowing down a car, even by 5 or 10 miles an hour, drastically increases the survivability of a crash. I mean, someone has visits the hospital, maybe has a recovery that's difficult, versus that person is no longer with us. There is an equity component here, and that was touched on previously. We don't know, and we're working to get this data. So we're working with the captain, we're working with PennDOT to make this part of the standard reporting. But the race of all the participants in a crash is not automatically collected. What we did do, though, when we put out this report, is we did an analysis of where are these dangerous streets, these high injury network streets, and who lives in those neighborhoods, right? And what we find is that dangerous streets are 30% more likely to be in a neighborhood where residents are people of color or majority people of color. And similarly, on an income basis, these high injury network streets are 3 times more likely to be in a neighborhood where the residents, a substantial portion, are living on low incomes compared to where the fewest residents live in low incomes. So we see that there is a concentration of these dangerous high injury network streets in minority neighborhoods and in low income neighborhoods. And this is a problem that we frankly need to work with council on. I don't think either one of us can solve this problem together or by ourselves. We've got to solve it together. Let me talk a little bit about automated enforcement. We think that those infrastructure projects, the ones that, let me just scroll up real quick, in that are on the high injury network, and especially the ones that are in this yellow capital plan, are that's the thing we need to do. But to the extent that enforcement is part of the solution, not all of it, or our first step, we think that automated enforcement has a lot of really significant advantages. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, we've got 2 automated enforcement tools available to us today. The one is the ARLI program, the automatic red light enforcement, that was launched in 2002. And how we get an ARLI camera in a place is, it gets reported, it gets put on a list, we do a study to show that it's warranted, and then City Council has to pass an ordinance to say, yes, it's approved in this location, and PennDOT has to approve it also. That program has been very, very important in saving people's lives. And I think this is critical here, that what we're interested in doing is reducing killed and serious injury crashes. If we've got some body damage, we've got a bump, you got a ding in your bumper, because there's a rear end tap, that's okay. We can all walk away from that. It's the T-bone that these ARLI cameras really prevent, that send people to the hospital or the morgue. And that's what this program has been able to do. It's been able to dramatically reduce those killed and serious injury crashes. The other tool we have is automated speed enforcement, or camera automated speed enforcement. And this is currently allowed by the state code on Roosevelt Boulevard only. We're in the middle of a 5-year pilot. The cameras just became active in August. It is too early to say anything about their effectiveness. Those first studies should be, we should start getting data this year, but we don't have it yet. But we think this is a tool, and we'll keep looking for the effectiveness, but has been dramatically effective in other places. And if you ask, why has Philadelphia seen a 70-80% increase in traffic fatalities during the pandemic, whereas New York and DC have been essentially flat? I think a big part of that is the automated speed enforcement. Both of those cities have flexible, ubiquitous programs throughout their city, so they have the tools to control speed. I think the other probably bucket is that they've been investing in a way in their infrastructure that we haven't been. I think one of the key parts here is the equity case for automated speed enforcement. You get a ticket in the mail. There is not the same likelihood that a traffic stop is going to escalate into harm for either the person pulled over or for the officer. Too many cases where we see a traffic stop turns into violence, and then it's on the national news, and it's a tragedy. That doesn't happen with automated speed enforcement. You get a ticket in the mail. Also, it doesn't take officer resources. You have the surety of getting a ticket is much more effective in changing behavior than the amount of the ticket. And last, I'll just say the camera doesn't know the race of the driver. We have to be careful that we're putting them in places based on the crash data and not the race of the neighborhood. But that camera doesn't know who's driving. The vehicle gets the ticket. It doesn't disproportionately pull over a certain kind of driver. So we think both for us, a traffic safety, we got to solve both of these problems, right? We've got a traffic safety crisis, we've got an equity crisis, we've got a climate crisis, and we've got to get solutions that can address all of these. And we think automated speed enforcement cameras are they solve some of our problems without making our other problems worse. So I think that's all of my presentation today. Thank you so much for listening, and Lily and I can take questions. I'm sorry, Lily, did you have anything to add?
No. Thank you.
Thank you for that enlightening testimony. Is the will of the committee that we want to stop and question now, or do you want to proceed with the next person to testify?
Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, can we proceed with we have a guest who has to leave pretty soon. My staff texted me, Professor Ryanson. Can we proceed
Yes.
with Professor Ryanson so we can get that testimony in before?
Professor, are you available?
I am. Hello.
How are you? State your name for the record. Thank you for your patience. Please begin your testimony.
Certainly. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Professor Megan Ryerson. I'm the UPS Chair of Transportation at the University of Pennsylvania and a Professor of Transportation Engineering and Urban Planning. I'm the founder of the Center of Safe Mobility, where I conduct research on urban transportation safety. And I'm here today speaking from that expertise. I'm also speaking as a proud resident, an active urban commuter, and someone currently considering if the streets are safe enough for my 9-year-old twins to walk themselves to school once the Philadelphia Public School reconvenes in person. The last two testimonies really covered the statistics, overall crashes and hit and run crashes. So I'm going to go right to solutions. One thing I want to say before that is that we've talked about hit and runs. We've talked about overall crashes. We've talked about how hit and runs have increased as a percentage of overall crashes in 2020. But if we are here to make meaningful contributions to public health through traffic safety, we must focus on all traffic fatalities and focus on solutions that reduce this trend. Traffic fatalities, traffic safety was a problem before the pandemic, and we need to focus on all. Traffic fatalities. When we narrow focus on safety intervention, hit and runs, we tend to focus on surveillance and enforcement, hotspot areas that see many of the crashes, limiting opportunities for running, threaten the possibility of a ticket, and hoping drivers will modify their behavior to comply with traffic rules. Right? We have enforcement and hope that it modifies behavior. In my field, study has found that enforcement has a weak to little to no effect on driver compliance. And I'll also say I thought Chris's Polhowski's point about how every one crash statistic is a person. Right? When we say that something has a small but not a very strong measure effect on compliance, right? That means we're leaving it open to many more crashes and many more people. To be effective, enforcement must be relentlessly consistent, geographically widespread, and include appropriate severe punishments that are intended to modify this behavior. So given the dire situation in Philadelphia today, enforcement alone is not insufficient. Enforcement alone is insufficient. So the abundance of bad news on our roadways really raises the question, why is it so difficult to modify driver behavior? Why is it so difficult to get drivers to drive slower, to be more alert, to yield to pedestrians, to yield to other drivers? And I say that while much of the historical policy has laid blame of the drivers themselves, and that's not totally untrue, but it is just as much, if not more so, a problem of how our roads are engineered and managed. And we've been talking about infrastructure, and that's a major part of the problem. So I'd like to talk about two reasons in particular why infrastructure is such a part of the problem. I'm going to talk about the difference between design speed and posted speed. Now I know Captain Overwise is here, so you don't have to raise your hands if you've ever sped on the highway. But have you ever been cruising down the highway and suddenly realize you're comfortably going 15, 20 over the limit? That's because the highway is designed for you to do that. We post a lower speed because, as Chris showed, speed kills, and so we post a lower speed to manage traffic, to smooth traffic flows, and because if a crash, we want people going at a lower speed. But the difference between design speed and posted speed forces us to constantly overrule the instincts and the messaging we're getting from the road, right? And Chris mentioned how wide roads and so make us go faster. That's the design speed, and we have to fight to not drive at the speed that the road is designed for. So let's back to Philadelphia's urban roads, specifically one that's lower congestion because of the pandemic, wide lanes and recessed curbs that allow for high-speed turns, combined with lower congestion, it encourages our drivers to drive fast. Should they constantly overrule themselves? Yes, right? But that's what we're relying on for safety. So to address these issues, Otis has decreased lane width, slowed down traffic in select parts of the city. Chris showed that map and talked through some projects. Chestnut Street Transportation Project, 20th Street to the South Street Bridge turn. These interventions are providing measurable safety. They're slowing down traffic, increasing the visibility of pedestrians, and they're also increasing mobility. Because those parked cars are blocking your view. You as a driver have to force yourself to stop before the stop line. It doesn't benefit you. You're not in danger, right? You need to actually overshoot the line in order to see cross traffic, but you need to force yourself to stop carefully just in case there's a pedestrian there. But we know this happens every single time I walk in my neighborhood. And maybe some of you are replaying incidents like this for yourselves. We know that drivers will simply overshoot the stop line, not force themselves to anticipate pedestrians. And this forces the pedestrian to be on the defensive, rather than the driver. Now, Pennsylvania Vehicle Code does require that cars are not to be parked within a certain number of feet, 20 to 30 feet of the curb. But no parking signs are not ubiquitous, nor are they effective, right? We need to block the roadway. We need to block off the parking at least 20 feet leading up to the curb, if not more, with an infrastructure intervention. Pushing parking back from the curb to make pedestrians more visible to drivers is called daylighting. Councilmember Brooks, maybe that was one of the words you were thinking of. Drivers will only reliably modify their behaviors when the infrastructure on which they operate their vehicle demands, through the infrastructure's designs, that they drive slower, pay more attention, and see and stop for pedestrians and other roadway users. And so I'm here to say that we must narrow our driving lanes, ideally with in some cases, this could be separated cycling lanes. In some cases, this could just be narrowing lanes. We need to address our intersection crossings. We need to block out the intersection crossing and extend sidewalks into the curb. These are called bump outs. They force drivers to approach and execute a turn more slowly, and they also increase pedestrian visibility. Right? When I think about my 9-year-olds crossing the street, I think about a sidewalk that extends a bit into the street so that they can wait safely on the sidewalk, but be very visible to a driver approaching an intersection. And we need to daylight the parking. We need to move the parking back from the curb, not just with a no parking sign, but with physical interventions. I'd like to say that in my estimation, Philadelphians want these interventions, right? Otis called for applications to the neighborhood slow zone program in 2019. They received applications from all over the city outlining interventions like the ones I suggest above. But because of funding, they were only able to fund 7% of the applications. It just felt like, why are only 7% of these neighborhoods getting to implement safe slow zones when so many more want this, right? It felt a little like the Hunger Games, or why should some go without and some not? It felt wrong, and it felt wrong in that way. And I imagine that it must have been so hard as Otis to go through these applications and only know that you can pick few. That must have just been a very difficult moment. The problem isn't that we don't want infrastructure interventions. And the problem is not that they are not effective. It's that we aren't prioritizing them. We aren't prioritizing engineering and design solutions. And so if we improve our infrastructure in these ways, we will see fewer fatalities. We also, at the same time, will build a city where everyone feels safe walking around, where children and the elderly, people who are low mobility in general, can move around with more confidence, can move around much more freely, to shop, to walk to work, to take their kids to the playgrounds, and to visit with neighbors. Councilperson Brooks had posed the question and was discussing, why are there more traffic fatalities in lower income neighborhoods? And then Councilmember Brooks, you also mentioned that infrastructure looks different in different parts of the cities. We have some of these interventions in higher income parts of the city. And I would argue that infrastructure and the cues that infrastructure gives to our drivers, particularly in some of the lower income neighborhoods, doesn't force attention. And that's a problem. And, I really think that we need to walk with these, with an eye to these infrastructure and design issues. I want to mention that I'm here to encourage everyone to prioritize these long-term behavior modifying engineering and design solutions. And I really want to focus on long-term and consistently behavior modifying engineering design solutions. There was a lot of discussion of crossing guards. Our crossing guard at our Philadelphia public school is wonderful, and it's such a core part of the community. But to me, when I see a crossing guard, it tells me that we aren't willing to design our streets to be safe for children to cross them, and that to me is a failure. That we need an adult in order to get our drivers to stop, rather than build out infrastructure that makes it safe for children to cross. Crossing guards are not a sustainable, consistent solution. In the pandemic, my children can't walk to the park. They can't do that because there is no crossing guard, right? We need to think about a suite of solutions in tandem. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have crossing guards, but we need to think about guards, enforcement, and we need to prioritize infrastructure solutions so that we can really effectively in the long term change the way drivers drive and change safety. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Member Thomas, I'm going to transfer the chair to you. But I want to say something that this whole hearing has made me think about. Over my time, I remember the exact locations where civic action was taken because of the removal of a street light on Hunting Park Avenue. CAG and RAH, which are two activist community organizations, shut a intersection down. When I tell you, buses stopped, horns honked, and they shut it down until they got their councilman, their senator, and their state rep to work together to restore that light. Same thing happened in Overbrook Park on Haverford Avenue. The people from PennDOT decided it would be better if they took out every other traffic light in order to hasten people coming from the suburbs, Member Thomas, to be able to get to their jobs in Center City. And they decided, and they'll say that's not why, but they shut the intersection down. I mean, total interruption of traffic flow. And again, that happened in Winfield Heights, right by the Target. There is a high concentration of individuals that utilize wheelchairs, and the stoplights were going too fast. I mean, they were changing so fast that they could not get across the street, and they literally had wheelchair activists block the intersection down. Now, as I look at those areas and I look at the income of those areas, that speaks volumes too. That their daily concerns for life trickle down to traffic. There are some places in my district where bullets are flying, and you have to duck the cars, but you also have to duck the bullets too. And those are often conflicting priorities. But I am grateful to you and the members of this committee for raising the consciousness of all of us so that we can make meaningful policy change during the budget. So I want to thank you, Member Thomas, and members of this committee for highlighting this important issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate it, and we appreciate all you do as it relates to leading the conversation around all issues surrounding public safety. So this is just another example. So thank you. We appreciate you. To my colleagues, I know that there are a couple of people queued up. What I would like to do is if we can just start by, and Chris, I'm going to go ahead and apologize to you now. If we can just start by taking questions for Professor Ryanson, because Professor Ryanson probably has about 5 minutes of our time left, literally. So if we could just take a few minutes for anybody who has questions for Professor Ryanson, we will let her go first. Then we'll bounce back over to Chris, if that's okay with you, Chris. So in the chat feature, I see Councilmember Green. Did you have a question for Professor Ryanson? You're on mute, Councilmember Green.
Yeah, the bulk of my questions were for Mr. Pekowski, but Professor Ryanson, thank you for your information. I think it was very enlightening about the point that you made reference to infrastructure, and that the lack of investment in infrastructure, especially in moderate low-income communities in our city, which is also leads to the fatalities that we talked about. And I think that highlights some of the conversations we had at the beginning of this hearing. So thank you for providing information. Do you have any specific data that you could share with the chair that can be circulated to other members of the committee that provides some additional insight in reference to that lack of investment from an infrastructure perspective, and also not only comparing Philadelphia but other cities, but there's been also those same trends where you've had higher fatalities in communities of moderate low-income people in cities around the nation, or at least in the region, that have also lacked that investment infrastructure. That would be helpful.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I do certainly have data on the second point that you raised in terms of the funding and the lack of investment. That's something I would confer with Otis, and so I wonder if Chris or Lily, you have more access to such data. And thank you for prioritizing my schedule. I can stay for maybe 10 more minutes. I didn't mean to be so rushed.
It's no problem. We're used to this on the council side. So just looking at those that are queued up, I don't think we have too many more questions for you. I know Councilmember Brooks have a comment, but before you go, I do have one question. So I do agree with you as it relates to investment in infrastructure. And I think about the fact that I grew up in Oak Lane, but I went to Frankfurt High School. So when I was in high school, one of the things we used to always do in the Frankfurt neighborhood was ride our bikes. And Frankfurt is probably one of those famous neighborhoods, like I'll go ahead and throw Nicetown under the bus since Councilmember Brooks is here, where there's like a lot of one-way streets, a lot of small one-way streets, but the young people, they bike a lot. And there was a thing when I was younger where young people will always get hit by a car on their bike in Frankfurt because they would have a lot of one-way streets, but then they would have these really small two-way streets as well, too. So coming into council, one of the first things I'm like is, we got to figure out how to bring bike lanes into more neighborhoods of color so that children can bike safely. And the biggest pushback I got was, which I completely understand, is that when communities of color see infrastructure issues happening to the street, they automatically think gentrification is coming. So how do you suggest we package this message if we're actually able to see some capital investment in infrastructure? How do we communicate this message in a way where we're trusted figures coming into neighborhoods of color, looking to invest in infrastructure without displacing people? I just want to know your thoughts on that before you get ready to go, because I don't think any other council members had questions. And then I'll let Councilmember Brooks go with her comment. I apologize.
And it sounds like this is something that Lily at Otis is doing on the everyday, and it's a very good and important point. And I think that the message has to continually be on safety, on how when we take away space from the vehicles, that the drivers have to drive slower, and we want slower traffic, right? So rather than being a bike lane project, right, I like to think about the Chestnut Street Transportation Project. It's a transportation project because it provided a new protected bike lane, but it also made crossing safer. It also slowed down traffic so that everyone feels safer, right? It's really like a slow streets, a slow zone. I love that neighborhood slow zone title, that Otis runs. It's really about slow streets, and protected bike lanes are one way to get there. If you have a lot of cyclists, it also provides the added benefit of physically separating the modes. But in order to combat some of that concern that this bike lane is here as a sign of gentrification, I think that focusing on slow streets, is a good messaging. And again, it sounds like Lily does this on the everyday, so I'm sure she has a lot of more experience.
Thank you, Professor. Councilmember Brooks?
Yeah, it's just really, really brief. I just wanted to thank Professor Ryerson for clarifying the term. I may have been thinking gaslighting, but I was meaning daylighting. So thank you for clarifying that term. And, I look forward to, talking to you more about this issue.
Great. And I was thinking, if you may already be familiar, but if you're not, the organization that is called NATCO, which is the organization of city transportation officials, they have a lot of really nice diagrams of different traffic interventions, and a lot of really clear drawings and their names and so on. It sounds like something that you might enjoy, and you can always feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk more about these interventions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. We appreciate your testimony here today. We appreciate your expertise, and we appreciate your advocacy around this issue. And I'm sure that you'll be hearing from other members of council as it relates to best practices and solutions moving forward. So thank you for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Please feel free to reach out.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilmember Green for questions for the other side of the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Puchalski, I want to thank you for your testimony. You provide some very alarming facts in reference to the increase of, and your phrase crash violence, I think is appropriate at what happened in 2020. Would you say that's fundamentally tied to the lack of having automated enforcement cameras here in the city of Philadelphia and only being in certain locations?
Yeah, I think it's a factor. I can't say, I want to be careful. We haven't done an exhaustive study. I think it's definitely, the lack of automated enforcement. We've gotten numerous anecdotes that there is a somewhat of a breakdown in norms over the pandemic about respect for following the traffic rules. What Megan said is like she said is pulling yourself back even when maybe the infrastructure is telling you to do something different. People have been very surprised when we said traffic crashes went up. They're like, oh, I thought driving went down. That's exactly it. The driving went down. There was no congestion to slow people down, and now they can go fast. So even though we know that traffic is about 80% of normal in terms of volumes, that 20% decrease from normal is enough to remove the congestion, so people can now don't have the same constraints. So I'm not constrained by the traffic, and maybe I'm not constrained by my own internal workings, and I'm also not constrained by an automated enforcement system. It's all these constellation of factors working together is my best estimate of what's going on.
And in other jurisdictions, the automated enforcement, is that handled directly by the municipal government or some type of city-related entity?
Yeah, I'm going to say I don't know who does technically gives the ticket out. In our city, the parking authority has been designated by the state to administer the system. Lily, do you know in DC or New York whether it's an arm of the city government? I think in DC it is, because they're like a state and a city at the same time.
And then in reference to a legislation that may be needed at the state level, as you were talking, I was thinking about the work I do as president of the Pennsylvania Municipal League. One of the issues that a number of cities have raised and have been raising regarding legislation in the General Assembly was in reference to radar and the need for those various cities to be able to do their own local enforcement of radar because of traffic issues, traffic calming, also public safety issues in a number of areas, but mostly I think it's tied to the traffic and not being able to do that type of local enforcement. So I'm curious, what type of legislative changes would you say are needed at the state level to help address some of the fatality or crash violence that you talked about?
Yeah, thank you, Council Member. That we are the only state in the entire country where local police cannot use radar to manually enforce traffic. The only state, and it just begs any explanation. There was any of several bills in the last session that didn't make it through that we looked at, we reviewed, and we thought would adequately address the situation. I think that's just the basics of the ability. What we're talking about is this automated enforcement where you don't need the officer there, and a program of automated enforcement that looks much more like the ARLI program for speed enforcement. So the locations can be chosen, not by Harrisburg, but by, the administration and council.
And then lastly, in looking at your chart, you showed information about kind of an old model was focusing on behavior, like do the right thing, versus now it's focusing more on behavior, but also a more balanced approach of infrastructure, which I just talked to the professor about, as well as vehicles. Well, we don't control the vehicles. That is being done by those that used to be in your line of work previous to being here with the city. But from the street infrastructure, what are some of the improvements that need to be made? And I am definitely cognizant of the statements made by the chair and the professor regarding the concerns that when investments are made from road infrastructure that raises a concern and question of gentrification. But what are some of the investments that we can be making that can help reduce this crash violence that we have in our city?
Yeah, there's a whole toolbox out there. It involves like the lane width changes, road diets, so removing the number of lanes, curb bump outs, protected bike infrastructure. There's a lot of pieces. I think they fall, though, if we could, into two different categories. I think there's the quick intervention, temporary treatments. So that's paint, that's a flex post, that is that maybe is a jersey barrier. Temporary materials can be moved if necessary. And then there's the permanent infrastructure. So how it works in New York, they'll do the temporary pilot.
Mm-hmm.
3 to 5 years later, they'll come back. They'll move the curb line, right? They'll build the islands out of concrete, and I think both are important. We're in a budget situation. We're struggling just to implement the pilot materials, let alone the coming back in concrete and putting something in that both us and the neighborhood, will know will last, is going to look good, etc.
And I'll close with this. I think one of the challenges is trying to provide the messaging to all communities in the city of Philadelphia. I know we have the Vision Zero initiative, but I'm not sure if that message is penetrating various communities in the city of Philadelphia. I think there needs to be a renewed focus on how that message is delivered and the messengers for that message in various communities around the city of Philadelphia. I know people have the concern of gentrification, but I think if people also had an understanding of this lack of infrastructure also has an impact on their neighbors and loved ones and their community by not having this infrastructure investment has increased the number of fatalities and crash violence in moderate low-income communities in the city of Philadelphia. That will possibly help to change the narrative towards people being more inclusive and more supportive of the infrastructure items that you talked about. Granted, we understand that finances and resources are a challenge, especially in our current dynamic due to the pandemic, but we still have to plan. We have a capital program, which is 6 years. We do need to plan to make those investments, but I think we need to make that type of messaging more apparent and in a more thoughtful, critical way to let people know that without these type of investments, we're going to continue to have disproportionate fatalities in various communities around the city. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
May I contribute some comments in response to Councilmember Green's questions?
Sure, please.
Thank you. So with regard to that last comment, Councilmember Green, and to some of the other questions that have been put forward today, it just calls to memory a conversation I was having actually yesterday with a Indigo liaison in Point Breeze neighborhood, Kim. And she's somebody that Otis has been working with in the Indigo program for several years and is an ambassador for the bike share program. And that model is one that Otis has found to be very successful in partnering directly with community members who are leaders in their neighborhood and giving them both a stipend, education, and resources to go and talk with their neighbors about the benefits that they find are very useful for the Indigo program. So she was saying to me the things that she found in her life over the years that were benefits to her and how that helped her in having conversations with her neighbors. So I think that this is something that we're continuing to try to expand throughout our different programs in Otis, including with an upcoming Vision Zero Youth Ambassador program, as well as with other infrastructure projects that we are working on in different communities, including right now early planning in Mantua, where we're working with some community liaisons, again, respecting and understanding their time that they are contributing to the work that we do by providing a small stipend to thank them for their time and the effort that they put in to having these community conversations. So I completely agree. I think that message and the messenger is extremely important and empowering to have community members who are the same people often who are coming to us and asking for some of these interventions and changes to be partners with us on the ground. And if I may, I would like to add one other comment to your question about the state legislation. I think, recognize that this body is not the body that was responsible for that, but I think it's important to mention the state legislation for what we call the CURB bill, which is a very important piece of legislation that did not pass in the last legislative session. I believe that it was passed by the House, but it did not pass through the Senate. And this legislation is really hindering our ability to be doing some of the bike lane projects in the city of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. So we are not able to use some of the temporary materials that Chris talked about, like flex posts, to install protected, sheltered bike lanes, meaning that many of the places where we know where this safe infrastructure would be useful, not just to cyclists, but to people who are walking and people who are driving or taking transit, we are really strapped because we would only be able to implement them if we had the funds to do full concrete and curb, which we simply do not have. So you're looking at a block could cost, a certain amount with the temporary materials, look at maybe 5 times that amount or maybe more to do it with the concrete materials. So we were very disappointed to see that not pass in the state legislature in the last session, and have been working with other partners, including the Bike Coalition, who I believe is on this, is in attendance today, to get that passed, among other things, as well as state enabling legislation for local control of speed limits, which is one of the goals of Vision Zero as well. So making sure that we're able to have different methods for reducing speed limits in the city of Philadelphia than what we have now. We're, again, another area where we're strapped in terms of actually just reducing some of those speed limits, which has also been proven effective to reduce speeds and reduce crashes and save lives.
Thank you.
Just if I could say one last thing, Mr. Chair. I know I've worked with Mike Carroll and Chris and yourself on legislation locally, but I think this provides opportunity to have a conversation with Rick Shuttler, our president of Pennsylvania Municipal League, and John Brenner, our deputy executive director, as well as Amy Sturgis, our legislative director, on these issues, because I would venture, just like I've seen with Act 111, where a number of my executive board members, mayors from Scranton and Lancaster and Pittston, in our first call with Governor Wolf this year, our first issue was Act 111 reform, and we're working with Representative Donna Johnson Bullock on that perspective. I think this is another area where we can have some synergy, because I think some of the same issues in reference to crash violence that we're seeing here in Philadelphia, there's probably also some challenges in Lancaster and Scranton and Harrisburg and Erie and various cities around the Commonwealth. And so there could be some synergy to work on legislation for the benefit of the city of Philadelphia and other cities around the Commonwealth. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Green. Chair recognizes Councilmember Gaudier. I think that Councilmember Gaudier was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I wanted to acknowledge your comments around this issue of bike lanes and how people in particularly Black communities and communities of color interpret that as a sign of gentrification. As a district, council member, I'm excited. I'm excited about the opportunity to engage my community in having more modern streets that provide, safe modes of transit for safe modes of passage for all types of transit. But I also realize that this is going to be a part of this conversation, right? And I think that we as a city have to acknowledge our part in that, right? So when we have had neighborhoods, for example, that have been asking us for like a decade or more for safety bumps, speed bumps, for stop signs, for help with getting handicap spaces. And then we in those neighborhoods perceive the city as not being responsive to that. But then, when younger, whiter, newer residents move in, there's a bike lane project. That's a problem, right? So one, I think we have to acknowledge our level of responsiveness to long-term residents of color in meeting, the needs that they have brought to us. And I think as we move forward with these projects, we have to make sure that we're responding, especially to those needs, right? And maybe even front loading some of those improvements in neighborhoods that have been crying out for them for a long time. And so I'm on the, I would love to have protected bike lanes in other parts of my district. I look forward to participating in those conversations, even where they're difficult. But I just want us to make sure that we're acknowledging, our investment in neighborhoods of color, and that we're making sure that, newer residents and long-term residents are getting things that they want out of these infrastructure projects. I also wanted to acknowledge Chris and Lily and thank them for their work. Even in the shorter amount of time that I've been in office, we've been able to do some good things in the 3rd District, and I look forward to a continued partnership. I also wanted to ask Chris, what do you need from City Council to support this work? And specifically, what do you need from a budget perspective?
Yeah. Thank you for your comments. First of all, it's been good to work with you and your staff, whether it's on the project in Mantua or the Lindbergh Ave, or the conversations we're about to start having on Walnut and Chestnut, extending that infrastructure all the way to Cobbs Creek. So, from a budget perspective, like all departments, whether operating or policy groups like ours, more resources means we'll be able to do more, and it's both on the capital side and the operating side. So, we need the capital to build the project, but we need operating to pay people like Lily or the next planner or engineer to have those conversations. And I think she pointed to the conversation she had yesterday. When we have these long-term relationships, that helps the gentrification conversation go better. It doesn't get rid of it, but when we've known somebody for 5 years, it's a lot better than just showing up and saying, "Hey, we're from the government. We're here to help." So, it's those long-term relationships. And so, we both need the operating to plan and design the project, and then the capital to build it. But, the city's in a budget crisis, so I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm sure every operating department would tell you, what they could do with more. But, to straight up answer your question, the budget constraints are real. And it's also with the traffic calming requests in the streets department. That's not my department, but we work together. It's, a lot of times they're not giving, or there's a backlog, not because they just don't want to give it out. It's because, it takes staff to do the study, to put it in, and then, at some point in the year, you run out of speed cushions to put in. So that's real. That's real. And so, we're willing to take a look at how can we make that program, the traffic calming program, more transparent, better. Redesign the parameters, making sure we've got the equity put in. But, at the end of the day, we need the resources to install the traffic calming. I think from a non-budgetary perspective, we're working on a package of safety and congestion related things called the omnibus. It's not ready to put out today, but, the requirement to get an ordinance for every bike lane, it does force us to have really good conversations, but it is also a barrier. And if we could find a way that we still have those good conversations, but without the need to go through the process of an ordinance, and then all the other steps, and then the time, that could add 4 months into the project delivery process, which is sometimes enough to kill a project. So I think if we could take a look at that, that would be critical. Last, just your encouragement for alternate modes, and this includes SEPTA. Everybody riding SEPTA means they're not driving around. That's really important. But thank you.
Thank you. I will not profess to speak for every district council member, but I am certainly willing to have the conversation about how we make some of this easier, particularly if we could do that and streamline the process while also having a robust and appropriate amount of community engagement too. I'll also say this is probably more for streets, but I wish there was a way that we can combine some of the surveying we do in response to requests for traffic calming with resident perspective. I found myself in situations where residents are saying, I see this happening on a daily basis. Yes. And then we're going out and saying, we looked at it and our data says we don't need traffic calming here. There has to be a way to marry that perspective in a better and more equitable way as well. And so I hope that's something that we'd be able to figure out as a city.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really what's behind the neighborhood slow zone program, is that this is a co-creation process. This is like a doctor-patient relationship. I hope that we're experts. You should expect that we know what we're talking about, just like a doctor is an expert about how the body works. But the patient knows where it hurts. The neighborhood knows, what they see every day, and it's when we don't listen to each other, things go badly. And when we take the time, which again, operating, that's just staff time. It's real. But when we take the time to listen to each other, then I think we get to an understanding and we get to the infrastructure that works.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That was a great line of questioning, Council Member. It was definitely beneficial for me as well, too. Chair recognizes Council Member Brooks.
Thank you, Council Chair. I have a few questions. I'm going to just dive in. So can you say more about the road design that you mentioned earlier and the 10 corridors that have seen investments?
Yeah, I'm going to mostly turn it over to Lily, but these are 10 corridors that haven't seen investments, but they're on a plan, and these are the places where we want to invest.
That's right. So the Vision Zero capital plan it was released with the Vision Zero action plan in November as a sister plan. To really look at some of the most concerning locations that we haven't yet touched, mainly because they're not low-hanging fruit, but they have significant, safety implications and concerns. So we used, a lot of data and looked at it from many different perspectives, including an equity lens, looking at other upcoming projects we might be able to dovetail with them to select these 10 corridors and 10 intersections, and mainly focusing on crash data as our number one priority for driving these projects.
So for clarity, did you prioritize the streets that are a part of the city that have been historically kind of disinvested, where our long-term residents are residing? Were they a part of this conversation as well?
Yeah, so I can provide more information on the specific locations, but I think a majority of these locations are outside of Center City. Many of them are in North Philly, in West Philly, where we see some of those crash hotspots and some of the equity lens that you're discussing.
Okay, and because I know that that we can pick places in the city that used to be housed by, low-income residents and had more residents of color and people living on fixed income, kind of to what my colleague, Councilmember Jones, mentioned earlier. But like Professor Ryerson mentioned earlier, these maps seem to prioritize 7% of the neighborhoods that are getting the funding, the neighborhoods that are already changing demographically, and not necessarily neighborhoods where we're seeing more long-term residents that have not seen the benefits of these investments in their neighborhood, as I think Councilmember Thomas mentioned earlier. So, to that point, my office is happy to help identify blocks like in my neighborhood and other parts of North Philly that could benefit from safer crosswalks and daylighting and speed controls, because, this is something that has been of great concern. And I think Councilmember Gautier mentioned, our neighbors feel like they're being ignored by the city. And I'm also concerned that we're applying like blanket solutions to solve, traffic issues that are specific to each neighborhood? And how are we engaging those long-term residents that may be hard to reach? And are we listening to their like holistic perspectives about it all? Because I believe it's critical that we approach this lens of, street safety by providing the residents a chance to voice their concerns. Specifically, when we talk about geographic inequities and how that impacts them directly. My staff fields constituent services calls regularly, where different solutions have been tried and failed over the years by the city. Long-term residents are calling us with ideas, but they feel left out of this decision-making process. And I understand why they feel like offended by being, excluded. And also it, amplifies the fear that, access to safe streets directly correlates with gentrification. And we need to make sure that, those voices aren't excluded, so we can, together create a better city. And I just was, listening to this from that lens and the importance of it. And even as we talk about bike safety, we talk about expanding, bike safety lanes, but I can't think of a clear path from where I live to get down to Kelly Drive to ride a bike that I would trust my kids to do. I mean, we did it as kids, but times were different then.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to collectively come up with solutions that are rooted in neighborhoods and communities. And, I just want to kind of put that on the record.
Yeah, we agree with you. We see it as a problem. I think we actually have a meeting later this afternoon, council member, to talk about bike lanes, including where you live. And, we recognize there's gaps in the network, not just the protected network, but the regular network. So we've got to address it. It is a challenge to meet everybody. We are learning how to do that. I think that neighborhood slow zones one Megan was talking about where we were only able to, we only had funding for a very small part. Those though, Third and Allegheny, working up there, we were working in some of the lowest income communities, and how we did it is we were sitting at the table with them and walking around the neighborhood, partnering with local community organizations, like APM and HASE, to make sure that we were connected, and that using engagement activities like saying, listen, here's our monopoly money, here's how much each improvement costs, here's a map of the neighborhood, what do you think, where do you think these should go? So those kind of planning exercises take more time, but we think they lead to a result where people have ownership of the improvement before it goes in. I don't know if I addressed your question. I don't think this solution gets all the way there. I'll be frank. We have a lot more work to do, and it's not just Otis; it's the streets department too. Who's got a lot more work to do to make sure that we're well connected with community. But I can tell you we're certainly trying.
Thank you for responding to that, and I look forward to this continued conversation around just creating more safe passages, as Councilmember Gautier said, from all modes of transportation, whether we're walking, driving, or riding a bike. People deserve to be able to access their communities in a way that's safe.
Yeah, we agree, and please keep raising this issue.
Thank you, Councilmember Brooks. As we close out this panel and get ready for the next panel, just a couple quick things for clarification purposes. We talked about earlier this idea of speeding and the fact that 41% of our traffic fatalities come from speeding, but less than 1% of the motor vehicle code stops in the city of Philadelphia are from speeding. We also heard different testimony that talked about solutions and things like that. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how effective is policing as it relates to how we are doing motor vehicle code stops as well as other traffic related issues? How effective, in your opinion, is policing as it relates to solving this problem that we have of hit and runs?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. So about stopping people for speeding, I think what the point that Councilman Green raised, how our police don't have radar. So it is nearly impossible. It is very difficult for them to give a speeding ticket in the city of Philadelphia. Radar is really the best tool to do that. So they don't even really have the tools to give a speeding ticket. They've got to set up 2 lines and use a stopwatch as if this was, the 1930s. They forget modern. This is a technology that's been around for decades, and they're
no. I completely understand the technology isn't there. I'm just saying, speaking from a solution-based perspective, your opinion, is an increase in policing and a stronger police presence a way to address this issue?
Yeah, I think this is a tricky issue, and so I'm going to go back to that chart that I had where the behavior change is part of it, but it's only one small part of it. So I don't think we can throw it out the window. I also think it's changing the infrastructure is the real long-term solution to the problem.
Thanks. That's I just wanted to get your opinion. Last thing, just for the record, and I know one of my colleagues had to leave, but Councilmember Gim earlier was talking about the crossing guards.
Yes.
And we talked about the budget last year. Shouldn't the crossing guards now be under your budget and moving between you and the managing director's office? Is for the record, because earlier there was some, I don't know if there was clarity as it relates to exactly where crossing guards are. Can you clarify that for the record, please?
Yeah, I can try to. When Councilmember Gim brought that up, I sent some messages to folks in the MDO who are working directly on this. That is still being transferred. It's finding the right home for it in the MDO. The Otis currently has about 15 people. There are over 1,000 crossing guards. So the MDO is still working on finding the right fit, both in terms of being able to effectively administer the program and also finding a part of the MDO where it's aligned in terms of the mission. So it's still in process. The timing is TBD, and that's the answer that I have, council member.
So we're definitely going to have to revisit this during budget season, right? And I'm just going to say that by the time we come back to have a conversation as it relates to budget season, I don't think to be determined is going to be a good enough response, right? Like we are, and I'm not even going to do a deeper dive into that right now because we have to stay focused on this hearing. But
I'll make sure
we come back. That can't be what we're doing because now there's a certain level of I guess you could say mistrust that creates issues with the public, right? Because we communicated to the public that we were going to do one thing, and now that's not happening, and the date is to be determined. And so this is why people begin to not trust government because we give them the perception that something is one way, and then we found out in hearings and through random dialogue that is not the way that we voted upon. So I'm not blaming you, Chris. I'm not blaming you, Lily. You guys have been giving us great information. Today's focus is really on hit and runs, but that was something that came up earlier that we wanted to get clarity on. And I'm just saying right now that we're going to have to do a deeper dive when we move into budget season.
Okay, I'll make sure to bring that back, Councilmember Thomas, so we're ready to address it. And when I say to be determined, that the move is happening, it's just finding the right place for it. But I'll make sure that we have a more... We know to be able to talk about this when the budget hearing comes.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Are there any other questions for this panel? I don't see any in the chat. Hearing and seeing none, I want to thank you both for all the work that you're doing, for your collaborative effort with council, for recognizing the importance of this issue through an equity lens. I also want to thank Captain Overwise as well as Professor... I always say her name wrong. I apologize, Professor, because she gave us some great information. Professor Ryerson. We appreciate all of you for Ryerson. Thank you, Chris. We appreciate all of you for being here and being a part of this conversation. If the clerk don't mind, can you please call the next panel of witnesses?
Thank you.
The next 2 witnesses are Stephanie Evans and Shannabelle Morris.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. This is my first time working with you, so I appreciate your support here.
No problem. Thank you.
So my witnesses, please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony. Stephanie, feel free to go first because I see you on my screen.
Okay. Hi, my name is Reverend Stephanie Evans. I want to thank you all for having this panel. Bear with me a second because it's a little emotional for me, even though it's been a year. My son, Robert Evans III, was hit by a hit and run driver January the 25th, 2020. And I want to say a little bit about my son because he was somebody. I just want to say that he was a devoted son, a faithful and loving father to Alani and his fiancee, Noelle. Intelligent, hardworking individual, carpenter, entrepreneur, loyal friend, avid Eagles fan, and a sportsman. His smile and intellect it lit up the room when he came in. He was a man and a very good friend. He loved playing basketball and cooking for family gatherings. His daughter Alani is still traumatized, still relevant till today. She's 9 years, well, she's actually 10 now. Her father took her to school every day, and he attended all her dance recitals, all her performances, and all her events. And Robert quote to his daughter every morning was, "Don't be afraid to be smart on purpose." So Robert and Noelle they routinely vacation twice a year with Alani, Noelle and him. They always vacationed twice a year. My son Rob, as they called him, was somebody, and he did not deserve to die needlessly. On January the 25th, we received a phone call around 1:35 a.m. in the morning, screaming, devastating call that my son was lying in the streets dead. We weren't sure what we were hearing. You know, you'd be waking up in the middle of the night, you're not sure, and you're not clear, especially when you have a law-abiding son. So his fiance kind of explained to us he was outside the 35th Police District, dead. So we arrived there at the Broad and Chaplas, outside the police district. So I asked them, "Where's Robert?" Because all we see is glass and debris all over the street. You could tell it had been an accident, but there's nobody. There's blood all in the street, but there's nobody. So we asked some of the friends that were devastated, "Where's Robert?" So they said the ambulance had taken him away. My pastor, William Scott III, and I and my husband went into the 35th district, and we asked, there was an accident outside. I don't even want to use the word accident. There's an incident outside of here, and we're looking for our son. We were told he was hit by, a hit and run driver. The officer had no information. Now, he got hit outside the 35th district. How do you not have any information? And you're the police station. I didn't understand that. So we went from hospital to hospital. We're at Einstein, searching for my son's body. So I'm thinking maybe this is not real, because why are we at Einstein Temple? We're going all over the city looking for him. The mortician, we contacted her because I'm trying to make it a little short because it's emotional for me. She finally located him at the morgue. So when she locates him at the morgue, well, actually, when she called the morgue, they had told her they couldn't check because it was too many bodies in the morgue. Too many bodies in the morgue. The mortician calls the city morgue, and you can't tell me rather my son is laying up there with a tag on his toe or whatever. Took her 2 to 3 days to finally get a response from the morgue. The morgue never contacted us. So my daughters and the mortician got in contact. They went to see his body, to pick up the body. Took 2 to 3 days. My son, they wouldn't allow me to go to the morgue. I was prohibited from going. And to come to find out, my son's body was mangled. Now, there was 2 witnesses, I understand. The young lady was sitting in her car. She was so visibly shaken, she never got out her car. She said the guy was going so fast that her car shook. And I think she was like in shock. Now, the other witness was another man. He said the guy was hit so hard he must be dead. There's no way he survived that accident. My son had parked in the middle of Broad Street to get out to get something to eat, so he never knew what hit him. The mortician told us that the casket had to be closed. And I was like, I don't understand, why does the casket have to be closed? So nobody would actually tell me he had been mangled. He hit him so hard the guy was speeding. But the gist of this, what scares me, is the city of Philadelphia, the city morgue, the 35th district, and then the detectives. Okay, so the city police detectives got all the information who hit my son. The car, they went to the home of the young man, African-American man driving a Chevy Impala. The father told the detectives, my son is going to turn himself in on Monday, which would have been January the 27th, 2020. That didn't happen. So they go back a couple of months later, I believe in March or something, they went back. The young man tells them he has a lawyer, and the lawyer explained to him he does not have to turn himself in. My daughters are in communication with the detectives or police periodically, so they were playing phone tag because of his work schedule. Evidently, he works in the evening or the wee hours of the night, so they kept missing each other, not returning phone calls. So my daughter finally gets in touch with the detective, and he told her, we have them all the information. We're waiting for more DNA. The young man lawyered up, as those was his words, quote, lawyered up, so we cannot make an arrest. We didn't make an arrest. And so my daughter said, why not? They told her because of COVID. Because of COVID? Something's truly wrong with that. You have the young man and his name. You have the car. You have his address. You know it's him. You know the know-how. Why is COVID an excuse to arrest this young man? I don't understand. And now it's 2021. As to date, there has been no arrest. But you have the information. And I've heard all the data. I've heard everything, how it's difficulty to arrest somebody from, I think, Overwise. I think a lot of the presentation was excellent. But in my case, you know who did it. You know the car. The young man lived in Mount Airy. He's eating every day with his family. I'm going to a cemetery. I had to bury my son. Took the mortician 7 days to fix my son that we could view the body. So the next time I saw my son, he was in a casket the day before his homegoing. We had to put on sunglasses. We had to put on a baseball. I wanted to bury him in a suit. We couldn't. I could tell that his leg and arm had been broken the way it was positioned in the casket. The sunglasses cover, she had to hire the mortician, and thank God for Bartlett Funeral Home, she had to hire somebody to come reconstruct my son's face. And so I just want closure for my granddaughter and myself. I understand there's a shortage in this traffic, the violations for hit and run. I'm willing to come in and volunteer. I've been working like over 30 years. I worked in corporate America. Now I work for a nonprofit. However, I just think in my case, it's a resolve. It's an easy fix. I don't understand if it was somebody else's child that was on the council, it would have been totally different because you have the information. It's different when they say, I'm searching for the driver. We don't have the car. We don't have an address. We don't have a name. If you have 5 components, who, what, when, and where, and how, why haven't we had closure to ease this pain? We deserve our family, his daughter, his fiance, which he was talking about getting married this year. We deserve some answers from the city. And why are all the speed bumps in Center City? According to the news report, he got hit at 12:35. We got a phone call at 1:35. And so I don't understand how the 35th district didn't know. I don't understand how the detective has become kind of lax. Don't want to see anybody fired, but it needs to be some improvement. I think I'm right in praying about a resolution for all of this. And I had a lot of questions, but however, during this presentation, I got a lot of answers. Now, my last thing is, when are you all going to make an arrest? In the meantime, I sincerely want to thank Councilman Isaiah Thomas. I want to thank you. I want to thank your team. Cassidy is her name. I won't say her last name. Part of the University of Penn. I want to thank Matt Blatcher from Channel 10. I want to thank you all for taking the time and searching my family out, because there's several families. I know this pain. Every time a hit and run come on the news, I go back to trauma. I'm devastated all over again. I'm a reverend. I have funeralized, eulogized so many people, not knowing I was going to have my own son, who's never been to jail, never been in trouble, just the usually, gross in life. Law-abiding citizen. He stepped out the truck to get something to eat with friends, raiding across the street. And this particular day, he decided he's going to drive his truck around Broad Street instead of walking with the friends. And he dies instantly. He never knew what hit him. So I thank God he didn't see it coming. We didn't see it coming. I hope I was clear. I saved some of my questions because I've been on here since 10:15 this morning waiting to be heard. I'm praying for every hit and run tragedy in this city. I'm praying that you all pass some laws. I've heard about the bike lanes. I've heard about the cameras, and thank God for those cameras, because that's how the case got resolved. But why is everything focused in Center City? The speed bumps, the lights. I live off of Roosevelt Boulevard, so I've seen hit and runs. I've seen so many tragedies. I've seen it with my own eyes. But when it gets close to home, it takes on a whole different life. This trauma won't end. We buried my son on February the 5th, 2020. And the reason why we buried him the last day, according to the law, that was the last day he could go into the grave, because she was trying to reconstruct his face. He's at Ivy Hill without a headstone. The headstone been paid for a whole year. But because of COVID again, it hasn't come yet. So my son is in an unmarked grave in Ivy Hill Cemetery. I never thought I would be one of those people who would actually lead on September the 17th for his birthday, releasing balloons and candles and praying. I never thought I participated in so many of them, but now it's me. It's us. So my son's name was Robert Evans III. We called him Rob. His friends called him Robbo, an entrepreneur. Worked for different hospitals, different agencies, because he was a carpenter. Loved to cook, loved family. Family man. I just want closure to ease the pain as we go through this. And I need answers for my granddaughter, because once a month she asks, did they catch the man that hit my father? Did they catch? And I'm like, we don't have any answers yet. We're just waiting and we're just praying. And I just want to ask the young man, like, what happened? I just want closure. That's all. And I pray that you all could be helpful in this area. That's it.
Reverend Evans, thank you so much for your brave testimony. I know firsthand your son definitely was a good person. I can only imagine the grief that you and the rest of your family are going through. And I think that it's important that you communicated that testimony today, because there are so many other people in the city who are suffering, who just don't have the strength to come before us to be able to communicate this concern. So you're speaking on behalf of you and Robert and your family, but you're speaking on behalf of a demographic in the entire city who it's just difficult for folks to do this. So Reverend Evans, thank you so much. My thoughts and prayers go out to your family. I do want to, if you don't mind, can you hold? We want to let the next witness testify, and then I want to open it up to my council colleagues for questions. And I believe there's a hand raised as well too. But the next witness, if you don't mind, please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony. And again, Reverend Evans, if you could stay on, please, we would appreciate it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chanamel Leta Morris. I'm from Warwick, New York. Councilman Thomas, thank you so much, and your city council for having this event today. I waited 4 years to be doing this. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in front of you. I believe it's imperative that I do, in order to provide an understanding of how and what I feel about vehicular hit and run incidents in Philadelphia. So let me share my story of Jamal. My son Jamal Morris was riding his bicycle in at 45th and Market when he was struck by a hit and run driver on April 16, 2016. He died on April 18, 2016 from severe brain injury at the age of 27. Upon his death, his organs and tissues were donated: his heart, his left and right kidney, liver and pancreas, and more. 50 recipients received his tissues. 3 months after his death, we received a letter from a person who received his heart. 2 weeks after that letter, we received correspondence from the recipients of his kidney and pancreas. That was... Jamal was my only child. He was born November 15, 1988 in Brooklyn, New York. He was a graduate of Warwick Valley High School in 2006, and in 2011 he received his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Drexel University School of Engineering. During his college years, he was a part-time staff member at the University of Pennsylvania Potluck Health and Fitness. He loved that place. After graduating, he worked as an engineer at Blackney Hayes and then at AMEC Forster in Philadelphia, both engineering firms. Jamal was an avid cyclist, nothing but a bicycle. He competed in wrestling and boxing competition. He played basketball, football, tennis, soccer, wrestling, and other sports. I think his favorite sports though was football. He believed that in order to have a good and healthy lifestyle, you must take care of your body. He was enthralled in rafting. I'm not sure if you guys know what that is, but he made me focus on it. It's a system of soft tissue manipulation and movement education that organizes the whole body in gravity. He believed in rafting. He paid out of his pocket because insurance didn't pay for it. In addition, he played many musical instruments: piano, saxophone, trumpet, drums, while being a composer who enjoyed singing his works. Jamal loved people. He shared his life with friends and family and saw no one as different. His friend loved him and trusted him. At 27 years old, he lived a full life. He traveled to Australia, Japan, Italy, France, England, and the Caribbean. He was a gift to his parents and his family as a whole. His presence is truly missed. I celebrate my son's life every day. Since his passing, a foundation was created in his name, the Jamal C. Morris Foundation. One of the main goals of the foundation is to send deserving African-American young students to Drexel University School of Engineering. We need more African-American engineers in America, in the world as a whole, and we plan to accomplish this through his foundation. His mantra was, "It's only getting better." No matter what you say to Jamal, "Mom, it's only getting better." So since Jamal's death, I have never heard from the officer in charge of the investigation, and I have his name. I'm not even going to say his name. I have called and visited the prison. We have placed a $10,000 reward for lead on the accident. Nothing materialized. I've worked with the Bicycle Coalition on getting legislation passed, following numerous visits to Harrisburg, meeting several senators. As my grandmother would say, don't leave any stones unturned until you make a difference in life. I'm a founding member of Families for Safe Street of Greater Philadelphia, and I intend to work as hard as I can with Families for Safe Street and the Bicycle Coalition to make sure that vehicular homicides are reduced significantly. We need stricter legislation and insurance review, including more red light cameras and speed cameras, and we must make our leaders accountable. I thank you for your time. I thank you for having this event today. And I pray that the voices of the people could make a difference so that each of us can drive, ride our bikes, and be safe in doing so. Councilman, I looked at you and I see my son. I see him 100% in you. So I thank you today. I thank you for your time, and it's only getting better. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you so much for your testimony. Like Reverend Evans, I can only imagine how difficult this is for you to come before us and communicate such painful thoughts. I also want to apologize to both of the families on behalf of the city of Philadelphia. What you've had to experience as it relates to the process after you've lost a loved one is one that there is no excuse for. And All we can do is hope that you highlighting these issues put us in a position where we can do a little bit better. Does any members of council have any comments or any questions for this panel? I know it's not the most difficult panel, not the easiest panel to ask questions to. Before we go and move on to the next, I'm sorry, Chair recognizes Councilmember Brooks.
Yeah, I just want to let the both panelists know that we hear your stories, and I am happy to be a part of this hearing with my colleague, Councilmember Thomas, and we'll continue to work as hard as possible to make sure you feel and that your family receives justice around this issue. So my sympathies are still with you and your families, and I just wanted to just recognize that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brooks. Before we go, just two things. Number one, if either witness want to add any other thing to the record that you feel like we need to hear, that we need to know, I will open the floor up to you as well. Captain Overwise, who was testifying earlier, he asked that you reach out to him, so we will have members of our office connect you to Captain Overwise, so hopefully we can get you some solutions to some of the issues that was discussed today. I see Captain Overwise is on camera. Captain, did you want to add anything to the conversation today?
Yes, I don't want to discuss publicly the specifics of Reverend Evans' son's case. We are this close. My hand on the camera. This close. I wish we had a solution for you right now, but we don't. I think the COVID remark referred to the fact that we're waiting on a DNA sample to get processed through the lab, and that the pandemic may have caused a delay in that. It takes a long time to begin with, but I think the pandemic may have caused a delay in that, and I think that's where that came from. But please email me, give me your phone number. I'll speak to you personally, and you, Miss, as well, Miss Morris. I'll speak to you personally as well. Email me and give me your phone number.
Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Overwise. We appreciate it. And again, I do want to apologize on behalf of the city of Philadelphia, because the things, it should not take a hearing for you to get the response that you're essentially asking for. And again, I can only imagine what other narratives are out there where people just don't have the strength, the courage, or the resources to be able to come before council and wait, 5 hours just to be able to tell a 10-minute or 15-minute testimony, because it means that much to you, and you care that much about your loved ones and getting justice for something that is unfortunate that took place that no one asked for. It's something that we should all feel obligated to essentially do for not just for the families that's testified now, but for all the victims across the city of Philadelphia who have experienced some level of trauma because of these unfortunate situations with hit and runs. So, Reverend Evans or Mrs. Morris, did you want to add anything as it relates to your testimony or anything else we need to hear from the record?
I am praying that something can be done to this. I looked at the penalty for hit and run. It says 3 years and $2,500. I don't know what that means. That 23 years it says and $2,500. And I think that the police, I was assigned to a prison to work with me, and to have not been given a call and say, listen, Ms. Morris, we know how we are. We are reaching out. We are doing everything we can. But no one, I haven't heard from the officer who was assigned to the case. No one reached out. If families in pain and you're assigned to a case, reach out. Say something. So if you have to lie, reach out and say, Ms. Morris, we are still investigating. But just let it die. I visited the prison, nothing. Communication is key. It makes you feel better that knowing that someone is working on it. We paid $10,000. We gave $10,000 for information relating to it, and nothing. It's just like I buried my son and it's dead. It died. And Jamal loved Philadelphia. He wanted to go to no other school but to Drexel University in Philadelphia, and he graduated and wanted to stay there. And 4 years later, nothing. It was just, he died and that's the end. But I will never let my son die. I would do everything I can to keep his memory alive in this world, regardless.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Reverend Evans, if you wanted to add anything, feel free to. You're on mute, Reverend Evans. I apologize.
I'm actually in agreement with her. I had actually wrote some notes during this whole process. I don't think 3 years is enough. When you can blatantly tell the detectives you do not have to turn yourself in, you can blatantly just drive away like you didn't do, nothing happened. I don't think the $2,500 is enough. The only reason we did not put out an award, because I was going to put out $5,000, because the detectives already had a name, address, and the vehicle. That $5,000 is going to go towards my granddaughter's education. My son's death is not going to be in vain. I actually was trying to formulate an organization, Mothers of Murdered Sons. Vehicular homicide is still murder. Because it was not a bullet, it still deserved much more attention. He only stepped out of his truck after work to get something to eat, and now he's dead. My son also went to Westchester for accounting. That's how he got into carpentry. He decided, I don't want to do that. He ended up going to trade school, just an all-around decent guy, and that's why it hurts. It hurts so much because he was not a thug. He was a law-abiding citizen. The unexpected just happened to him. Like how could not the city, why didn't my daughters, both college graduates, smart young ladies, track down detectives, the morticians, track down his body, constantly calling detectives? I feel your pain because the detective is like playing phone tag, not calling back. I'm like you, communication is the key. If you could only say, listen, I'm still working on the case. I'm still, waiting for the DNA. Some type of communication to let us know it's a glimpse of hope. My son's life meant something to so many people. I'm not going to let him die in vain. And I want to just, if I need to volunteer at the traffic people for technologies, all these three things they're trying to implicate in, getting things happen, ask for volunteers. Just train them. Like you talked about training. Train some of these families that's been hit by tragedy. I'm quite sure it's some qualified families that's been traumatized that's willing to come in if the money isn't all there. Don't leave us out. Don't count us out. Ask us what we like to be a part of the change. So when it happens to somebody else, we can say, listen, help is here. We feel your pain. That's all I'm saying. But God bless you, Councilman Council and Brooks, for staying on. Just thank you all. This was a great help, believe it or not. You may not think so, but this is the beginning. So thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Evans. We appreciate it. And again, thank you, Ms. Morris, as well, too. Very heart-wrenching testimony. And Reverend Evans, if you decide to start that organization, Mothers Murdered by Son, please feel free to reach out to our offices so we can help you get that off the ground. Because like you said, and like it's been said so many times, I'm sure that you're not just speaking for your family and your loved ones, you're speaking for constituents all across the city who just didn't have the ability to be here today to communicate this to us. So thank you so much. We appreciate your testimony. If the clerk could please call the next panel of witnesses.
The next panel is Brendan Flynn and Randy Lobasso.
Thank you both for being here. We apologize for the delay. This has definitely been a very long hearing, so we appreciate you being patient, but it's also clearly an important conversation that we absolutely have to have. So please feel free to state your name and begin with your testimony. Brendan, if you don't mind, you can go first and followed by Randy, then we'll open it up for questions.
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you. A little static, but we can hear you.
I'm connected through my phone, so that might be the. But I'll just make sure that I speak loudly and clearly. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Brendan Flynn. I'm an assistant district attorney here in the city and county of Philadelphia since November 2016. I am currently in the homicide and non-fatal shootings unit at the district attorney's office, where I oversee the investigation, charging, and prosecution of vehicular homicides here in the city and county. I'm honored to be here today in front of this committee to discuss the role that prosecutors here in the city and across the Commonwealth play in addressing this serious problem, the problem of hit and run accidents, also known as leaving the scene accidents. I'll discuss the law. I'm kind of piggybacking off a little bit of what Captain Overweiss talked about earlier, but I'll prosecutor's perspective, and I'll specifically focus on the cases that I handle, which are the cases where a fatality has occurred. So as Captain Overweiss talked about earlier, the standard charge that we talk about when we talk about a leaving the scene accident is found at Title 75, Section 3742, under the somewhat innocuous sounding title of accident involving death or personal injury. And I placed the language in my written testimony. I won't go through the actual statute, but essentially what it means is if you are involved in an accident where a personal injury or death has happened, you have to stay at the scene in order to provide information and in order to render aid. So as we've discussed, as Captain Overweiss mentioned previously, that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of incarceration of 3 years. It's a felony of the second degree, meaning the max that you can someone can be sentenced to on that is 10 years. So you could potentially get a sentence of 5 to 10 years. It's also important to note that neither a sentencing judge nor the prosecutor can demandatorize that sentence. So if someone is found guilty of accident involving death or personal injury where a death occurred, you're required to serve at least 3 years incarceration. We must show that the defendant in this case was either criminally negligent or reckless, and that they knew or should have known that a personal injury or a death occurred as they're leaving the scene. There's also additional charges that someone who causes a death and leaves the scene could be responsible for. That would be homicide by vehicle, involuntary manslaughter, as well as recklessly endangering another person. So if a defendant is found guilty of all of the above charges, including accident involving death, and they could face potentially actually 22 to 30 to 44 years in incarceration. Now, in addition, and I was really happy to hear. It was moving for me to hear Reverend Evans' testimony, and she specifically mentioned something along the lines of, that this is considered murder, and in some cases, a case where a defendant leaves the scene can be charged as a murder, as third-degree murder, which is these are under certain circumstances where, for example, if essentially the Commonwealth, we would have to show sustained recklessness. That if a defendant was drag racing at high speeds with another driver, if a defendant disregarded multiple red lights leading up to an accident or a crash that results in a death, if the defendant was fleeing from law enforcement, or if the evidence shows that a defendant was disregarding repeated warnings to slow down from a passenger or something along those lines, the defendant can be charged with third-degree murder. That is a maximum sentence of 20 to 40 years, and that's in addition to the other charges. You could be charged with third-degree murder and leaving the scene, and homicide by vehicle and involuntary manslaughter. And if the defendant leaves the scene, that is a factor in considering whether third-degree murder is applicable in this case. And I'll just note well, actually, Captain Overweiss covered that. So I'm just going to focus a little bit on some of the case numbers that I've seen. And these numbers are slightly different than Captain Overweiss's numbers because these numbers are based off of internal our tally internally at the DA's office. That's based off of reports that we get from the police department at the time of the initial incident. So there's a little bit of a difference. And in addition, these numbers do not include crashes investigated by the Pennsylvania State Police, which they have responsibility over crashes that take place on 76, on 95, and on the Vine Street Expressway. So these unofficial numbers are instructive. My numbers show that there were 114 automobile crashes investigated by AID, resulting in a fatality in 2020. Very, very similar to Captain Overweiss's numbers. Note, however, some of these cases will not result in criminal charges. If a defendant or if a suspect is acting, is not acting in a reckless manner, and it could just be a tragic accident, and just the person could potentially be held civilly liable, but is not going to be held criminally liable. Now, often cases where someone leaves the scene, that will more likely to be a case where there's criminal liability that attaches. So in any event, 26 out of those 114, according to our tally, are leaving the scene crashes, either by driving their vehicle away or leaving on foot. And of those 26, I have current active charges, meaning not only has there been a arrest warrant issued, but there's also been an arrest made in 5 of those 26. So that's just under 20%. Now, I will also note that investigations remain ongoing, and according to my unofficial numbers, there were 8 leaving the scene crashes in the fourth quarter of 2020, in just October, November, December. So that seems to me a lot in just one quarter. So they do remain ongoing. I work cooperatively with the AID investigators to make sure that we have cases that are strong, that will be able to take to court to either result in a plea or a guilty verdict at trial. And in closing, I wanted to note, and I think the 2 witnesses on the prior panel really underscore this, that each and every one of these incidents is just an enormous tragedy. And we can never forget that behind each of these numbers are people, the victims themselves, as well as the family members and friends that they leave behind. Nothing we do can bring these loved ones back to them. They will feel this loss deeply and profoundly for the rest of their lives. But what we at the DA's office and in law enforcement can do is fight every day to ensure that those responsible are brought to justice and held accountable for their actions. That's what I'm committed to doing, and I know that the men and women in law enforcement and AID and at the state police are committed to doing so as well. So thank you for giving me the time and opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Brendan. Can Randy, would you please state your name for the record and communicate your testimony?
Sure. Randy Labasso, the Policy Director of the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia. So thanks for having me today. I just first want to thank you especially for including my friend Shanabelle Morris and Reverend Evans, who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before. But I think, as everyone here knows, that their testimony was extremely important and obviously, gets to the heart of why we're here today. So I'm going to go through my testimony. A lot of it's going to be repeating what you already heard, but I'm just going to state it all for the record. So since 2016, the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia has been keeping a public online database of all traffic fatalities in the city of Philadelphia. This has been done in part as part of our Vision Zero work to help the public understand where crashes are happening, and more importantly, the lives that were ended in these crashes and the families they impacted. The people who've lost their lives, whether they are acknowledged in the Philadelphia media or not, are acknowledged on our website, phltrafficvictims.org. And while we've seen some progress in the number of deadly crashes over the last few years, obviously last year was extremely bad, especially involving fatal crashes and hit and runs. So the 2020 statistics are pretty staggering when compared to a normal Philly year. Deadly hit and runs doubled in 2020 over 2019. Overall deaths rose more than 70%. In total, our initial preliminary numbers found that 153 people were killed in motor vehicle traffic in 2020, compared with about 90 in 2019. We are getting our numbers both from the Philadelphia police and through media reports. 34 of those deaths were the result of a hit and run, which is at least the most hit and run deaths since we've been keeping track of crashes. This is concerning, and for countless families around the city, obviously very heartbreaking. There are more unfortunate factors at play here, though. Data show that people in low-income areas of Philadelphia...
I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt you, but just for a quick moment of clarity, you said how many? What was that number you said of hit and run deaths in 2020 that you had?
I have 34.
Really? Okay, I'm definitely want to come back to that point. I apologize. I just thought I heard you correctly. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so data show that people in low-income areas of Philadelphia are more likely to be the victims of traffic violence, hit and runs and not hit and runs. And most of the roads that kill people are wide PennDOT-owned roads and allow drivers to gain speeds that are not advisable or legal, as we've heard before today. I'm mentioning all traffic crashes here and not just hit and runs because I don't believe you can necessarily teach a person empathy to stay at the scene of a crash if their first inclination is to take off. I also don't believe that increased police enforcement is realistic or will help solve this issue. But what is realistic is changing our streets in such a way that these sort of incidents don't happen in the first place. It's for these reasons that the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia helped organize a local chapter of Families for Safe Streets in recent years. Families for Safe Streets is an organization made up of the families of traffic violence, and they use their voices to help make our streets safer for everyone. And Shannabelle, who you heard from, is a co-founder of that group. So in 2017, the Bicycle Coalition teamed up with another co-founder of that group, LaTanya Bird, to advocate in the state capitol for an automated speed enforcement bill to make Roosevelt Boulevard specifically safer. LaTanya's family had in 2013 been the victims of an unspeakable tragedy on the boulevard when she lost her niece, Samara Banks, and three of Banks's children, Samir, Seishan, and Sadine. The automated enforcement legislation was passed in the legislature and then by city council, and the cameras were turned on last year. So automated speed enforcement around the world has shown to curb traffic violence. And while we currently have less than a year of data available on our current project, it seems to be making a difference on Roosevelt Boulevard. While there were still way too many deadly crashes on Roosevelt Boulevard in 2020, those crashes, according to our data, represent about 7% of all deadly crashes in the city. Whereas before the speed cameras, specifically in 2018, Roosevelt Boulevard accounted for up to 20% of all deadly crashes. So while we can't necessarily say that was the main cause, it does look promising down the line. The Bicycle Coalition has also long advocated for re-engineering streets with safety in mind. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with our stance on protected bike lanes and the increased safety of a well-designed bike lane can provide to citizens using the street in a car, on foot, and on a bike. But there are many more examples of changes that can be made to a street that City Council, the state legislature, and the mayoral administration should consider in response to this public health crisis. The first should be an expansion of that aforementioned automated speed enforcement pilot in the state legislature. Speed, as you heard from Otis, is the number one factor in whether a person involved in a crash will live or die. We can't stop all crashes overnight, but we can give the victims of crashes a better chance at survival. And I understand that City Council does not have a voice necessarily in the state legislature, but it's important the legislature understands the problems we are up against here. And your collective voice on this issue can help make a difference. As far as the expansion of automated speed enforcement program is concerned, I think an easy ask to the state legislature from City Council will be to expand it into school zones and potentially the high injury network, as we've seen before, the 12% of city streets where 80% of deadly crashes are happening. However, I'd like to point out the obvious, which is that those who use the roads most are the most likely to get tickets for speeding by these automated enforcement cameras. And those who live nearby those roads where the cameras are probably the most likely to use those roads. And there are commonalities of Philadelphia's deadliest roads that we have to keep in mind. And the main issues there are they were poorly designed, large arterials, mostly through low-income neighborhoods. Many of those roads were designed during the mid-century urban renewal process and were designed to give people in the suburbs easy, fast access in and out of the city. Neighborhoods have since been built up around these roads, mostly in North, Northeast, and Southwest Philadelphia. And it's important to note that the poor design of these roads is not the fault of the residents in those neighborhoods. They are the victims of poor, inequitable design. The pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists who have died while using these roads and their families have suffered because of poor city planning that did not have them in mind in the first place. And for that reason, I think it's important first that Philadelphia move toward an automated speed enforcement approach that encompasses the entire city. This, I feel, is the only equitable way to bring down traffic deaths using this technology specifically. The Roosevelt Boulevard project was a much-needed Band-Aid for Philadelphia's most dangerous road, but in the future, we need to expand this technology for the safety of everyone. We also must understand that speed cameras are not a long-term solution. They are a temporary tool that we can use on our streets until that street is redesigned according to proven safety standards. So second, the administration and city council need to reprioritize the engineering of our most dangerous roads. Thanks to the work of the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, we know where these deadly crashes are taking place. We know what needs to be done to the physical environment to curb this problem. The city's Complete Streets Guide also provides details to understand the options available for different kinds of streets in the city. So re-engineering is a long-term solution out of the situation I think we currently find ourselves in. I know, and this has been discussed, not all engineering changes are popular, especially upon first glance, for a variety of reasons. The popularity of a particular project should, of course, be considered, and the neighbors should have a say in how that project is installed in their community. But it's important to put high consideration on the lives that have been lost to traffic violence and those that will be lost in the future if nothing is done. I remember when we started counting the number of fatalities in Philadelphia, it was the beginning of 2017. I looked at the numbers historically, and I remember January 1st, 2017, I said to myself, by the end of this year, about 100 people will not be living in Philadelphia anymore because of this issue. And it's just horrible to think about, but it's the reality. So we have to consider those at least 100 people that are being killed every year. And last year, obviously, much, much worse. So lastly, although I know we are in the midst of a budget crisis, I would implore City Council to consider restoring funds to Vision Zero and the Complete Streets activities that were previously cut. The increased traffic and violence reinforces that Philadelphia has an even more compelling reason to address its high per capita fatality rate and continue to work towards 0 deaths by 2030. One of Mayor Kenny's high-profile commitments when he took office in 2015. So I know Chris Pahalski sort of got into this, but I'm going to sort of look at the numbers that were cut and what I think needs to be restored. So as the fiscal year 2022 budget begins to be shaped, I think the Kennedy administration and City Council should consider the following to help curb the increase in vehicular deaths. Number one, add $1 million to the Vision Zero maintenance line item to pay for supplies for Vision Zero maintenance crew uses. And I can be more specific about that, what that means later on if you have any questions. Restore $425,000 to Otis to conduct Vision Zero planning and design projects. Restore $2 million to Vision Zero in the Streets Department capital budget. And maintain staffing levels in Otis and the Streets Department to carry out the 2025 Vision Zero action plan. And I understand that's a lot, and I know everyone's asking for these things, some more specifically than others, but I figure as a not an official person, not a member of government, I could be the one to kind of throw that out there. So, like I said earlier, you can't really rely on everyone to have empathy when a crash takes place, nor can you cover this problem with stepped up police enforcement. But you can rely on safe engineering standards, and that should be the focus of the work around the hit and run epidemic. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you both for your testimony. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your patience as well, too. I know that this has been a long hearing, on an emotional roller coaster. And more importantly, thank you for your solution-based initiatives, both offering recommendations and suggestions that I think that we should consider. Of course, you've submitted written testimony as well, too. So you can definitely assure that my office, as well as other members of council, will be following up to put us in a position where we can continue to brainstorm. Because it seems like just after listening today, that the biggest thing that we need to do is capital investment in infrastructure. We have other solutions as far as Band-Aids like cameras and things that we feel like can be a temporary solution for right now. But it seems like the direction that we need to go in, based on all the testimony and all of us acknowledging that this is a serious crisis, is capital investment in infrastructure. I think that that's the common theme that we've heard from all the experts across the board as it relates to mechanisms and ways that we can move forward to create systemic and permanent change. So before we close out, if either of you want to add anything or comment on that, please feel free to add that to the record, and then we have to transition to public comment.
Well, council member, I would just say that the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I would note that I think cameras do play a role, particularly in my side of the house, in terms of yes, holding people accountable after yes, they have done something, where somebody has been killed. I'll specifically note that in the area of Temple University, the cameras that Temple University has, specifically related to Broad Street, North Broad Street, that area, they've been invaluable in having successful prosecutions in a number of recent cases. So I would just note that, and I really appreciate the time to testify today.
Thank you for being here. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Randy, but if not, I'll pass it to the clerk so she can transition us to the next part of the meeting today.
We have three. Oh, I'm sorry, Randy.
Well, thank you both. We appreciate your testimony. We look forward to working with both parties so we can collectively brainstorm how do we really look to try to bring some systematic change. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. And most importantly, thank you for your tireless work on this important and crucial issue. We appreciate it. Madam Clerk, I'm sorry, colleagues, is there any other member of council who would like to comment on this panel or on this bill? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, can you please call the set of witnesses?
Yes, we have three people signed up for public comment. Emma Young, Susanna Hall Maynard, and Amelia Rothermel, who needs to be connected by phone. But I believe Emma and Sue are already connected.
Awesome, great. So, Madam Clerk, if you don't mind, can I call the first witnesses to testify while we get the third connected?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So,
hello?
Yes, please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony.
Hi, my name is Amelia Rothermel. Good afternoon. My name is Amelia Rothermel. I'm a senior criminal justice student at Temple University with a focus in law and political science. In my time as an undergrad, I spent several years learning about the issues in our criminal justice system with management of vehicular accidents. On the police reporting, judicial review, and political side on the issue, we have not done enough. I want to take the time today to thank Councilman Thomas for holding this hearing to address the need for education surrounding hit and run in the city. That's it.
Thank you. That was quick. Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you for your patience as well, too, and thank you for your passion around this issue. We appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you please call the next witness?
Emma Young.
Please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony.
Emma Youngs. Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a junior at Drexel University, majoring in civil engineering with a focus on transportation and traffic engineering. I want to thank Councilman Thomas for organizing this hearing to address the growing problem of hit and runs. As a student, I'm learning firsthand about the infrastructural and systematic issues that surround hit and run cases in Philadelphia, and I'm proud to know that Councilman Thomas is shedding more light on this terrible problem. I plan to use this information I learned today to stop hit and runs from happening in the future through extensive studies and designs like in my future career. I want to thank Councilman Thomas for championing this cause and helping to change the lives of Philadelphia residents for the better. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate it. We appreciate your advocacy as well, too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, can you please call the next witness?
Susanna Hall Maynard.
Please state your name for the record, and you may begin with your testimony.
Hi, my name is Sue Hall, and I'm calling. So I worked for 4 years on the spinal cord injury unit at Moss Rehab, and I saw firsthand the devastating effects of non-fatal car crashes. A spinal cord injury takes away a person's independence in all aspects of everyday life, from washing and dressing to eating and drinking to managing bowel and bladder activities. The effects on the victim and the family cannot be overstated. People need to move or renovate their homes so that they can be accessible. Incomes disappear because the victim can't work anymore and their family has to care for them. Costs of living increase dramatically. I also spent time on the brain injury unit there, and I'll never forget, there was this handsome young Ivy League student who was the victim of a hit and run, and his hospital room was covered with posters that his lacrosse team had made for him, and he didn't recognize his parents anymore. But on the subject of cost that I mentioned a minute ago, one consequence of a hit and run is the lack of insurance coverage from the responsible party. And this can make a real difference for the victim and their family. Things like adult diapers and wipes, catheter kits that are easy to use, let alone home nursing care, are not fully covered by insurance, or at least not to the level that the person could actually use. And supplemental coverage could make all the difference in smoothing those things out. But in a hit and run, you've just got what you've got. And also on the insurance coverage side, I currently work in an urgent care setting as a nurse practitioner. And I also wanted to mention the number of people I see on a day-to-day basis for driver's permit physicals. And I was shocked when I realized how many of them have driven themselves to their visit. So I used to work in a pediatric office, and I would greet patients at these visits with a friendly, like, hey, so you're ready to drive? And I had to change my approach to that because I realized how often here I would get a sort of uncomfortable look and a little like, well, legally as a response. So I'm really, really glad that City Council is taking a look at this. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your work and your expertise as it relates to this area, as well as the people that you're working with on a consistent basis. So thank you. Thank you so much. Madam Clerk, would you please call the next witness?
There are no other members signed up for public comment today.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any other members of council who would like to comment on this resolution? Hearing none, I want to thank all the panels of witnesses for your participation today. We value your opinion. This concludes the business before the Committee of Public Safety today. I want to say thank you to all of my colleagues, as well as our chair, Councilmember Jones, as well as my partner clerk for the day, Samantha. I appreciate you, and all of my staff, the tech staff, and then staff involved in this to make this happen and to highlight such an important conversation. And most importantly, thank you to the victims and the families who took the time to share their narratives and their stories. All the facts and all the experts were great, but I feel like myself and a lot of the people who were able to hear the testimony today, what will remain with us the longest is the pain from the families who talked about suffering and being victims from these unfortunate situations. So thank you, everybody. This concludes our business for the day. Have a good rest of the day.